Bienvenue, good morning, viewers, and welcome to our broadcast of the Senate session Senate session today. It is, of course, another day in the Senate. Avec, I'm mixing English and Creole. Avec nous avons préparé pour Senate là. Well, now we've seen the arrival of the Sergeant and the President, so we will go right over. I get confused today with my English.
Let us pray.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty God, to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations, and grant that we, having thy fair always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interest, prejudice, and partial affection, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the King, the public weal, peace and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity one towards another. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen.
Thank you very much, Chaplain. Madam Clerk, could you please administer the oath to our new senators? Please.
To raise my hand. I, Didier Felician Shelton Daniel, do solemnly affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to St. Lucia, and that I will uphold and defend the Constitution and the laws of St. Lucia, and I will conscientiously and impartially discharge my responsibilities to the people of St. Lucia. I do affirm.
I, Nancy Charles, do solemnly affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to St. Lucia, that I will uphold and defend the Constitution and the laws of St. Lucia, and I will conscientiously and impartially discharge my responsibilities to the people of St. Lucia. I do affirm.
I, Laura Jepianuel, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to St. Lucia, that I will uphold and defend the Constitution and the laws of St. Lucia, and I will conscientiously and impartially discharge my responsibilities to the people of St. Lucia. So help me God.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Announcements. Good morning, Senators. And I wish to apologize for the late start, but I have received correspondence from the Speaker of the House of Assembly advising that the following motions and bills were passed in the House of Assembly and forwarded to the Senate for its concurrence. Value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3, Number 3 order. Public Finance Management Act, a resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital or current expenditure, Education Rehabilitation Climate-Linked Facility. Public Finance Management Act, resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital and current expenditure to finance the Patience Community Water Supply Project. Code of Civil Procedure Amendment, Invest St. Lucia Amendment, Civil Aviation Amendment, Regulated Substances. I beg to announce that His Excellency, the Acting Governor General, has been pleased to assent the Public Debt Management Bill. I am in receipt of correspondence from the Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Sustainable Development, Innovation, Science and Technology and Vocational Training, Dr. Pauline Antoine, Senator Alison Jean, Senator Norani Aziz, Senator Angelina Polius, and Senator Herod Stanislas, advising of the unavailability for today's sitting. On this note, I wish to welcome Senator Laura Jean-Pierre Noel, first time in the Senate, Senator Didier Daniel, Senator George, well, George is not here, Senator Nancy Charles, welcome back. I would like to inform Senators of a special meeting and luncheon with past and current female members of Parliament, which will take place on Friday, 8th December 2023. The purpose of this gathering of women parliamentarians is to formalize our Women's Parliamentary Caucus, which was initiated on 29th December 2021. This date was chosen to coincide with the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, November 25th to December 10th. And this will culminate with a special luncheon in the Members' Lounge. November 25th, to remind all, it's International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and December 10th is Human Rights Day. I would like to inform Senators that the Women Parliamentary Caucuses add value to parliaments as they can do the following. 1, serve to ensure that gender equality issues are mainstreamed into legislative and policy processes and within parliamentary processes. It can also influence policy and legislative agendas through cross-party cooperation. It can facilitate dialogue within and across parties. It can provide training and support to members as well as information and analysis. We'll therefore look forward to engaging all our past and present female members of Parliament, and we encourage all to make a special effort to attend. Senators, since our last meeting, I attended the 66th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference, CPC, in Accra, Ghana, from 30th September to October 6, 2023, under the theme, Commonwealth Charter 10 Years On, Values and Principles for Parliaments to Uphold. During the conference, I represented St. Lucia at the Commonwealth Women's Parliamentarians meeting and the Small Branches Steering Committee meeting. I was also part of a Caribbean delegation which paid an official visit to the President of Ghana. I also gained acceptance into the Commonwealth Parliamentary Academy residential program in Edinburgh, Scotland from October 16th to 20th, and was awarded a CPA certificate. I wish to encourage senators to sign up for the CPA Academy online courses and to qualify for residential program. If you need information about this, you can always check in with the clerk and myself downstairs so we can guide you accordingly. It's for both male and female senators, not only female. Just to give you some more information, senators, and that is to congratulate Senator Lucia Jawahir. The CARICOM impacts in a collaboration with CAFA, GAC, DRC at UE, and a small arms survey project based in Switzerland. They are embarking on a project aimed at enhancing regional integration in the response to firearms trafficking and violence. The project has a dual focus on security and public health. Its ultimate aim is to establish an effective pathway from locally conducted research to evidence-based policy making. To achieve this goal, the agencies are seeking involvement of regional experts in the fields of public health, violence prevention, and firearms related to join the advisory committee. I wish to inform you, members, that Senator Lucia Jawahir was invited by this project to join the Special Regional Advisory Committee to give support to this special project. The committee's role will be pivotal in supporting the project by sharing their valuable expertise, providing feedback, and facilitating the dissemination of their findings. The inaugural meeting was held on between November 20th to 21st in Barbados this year. Once again, congratulations to Senator Jawahir on being invited to join this committee, and I know you will represent us with excellence. All the best, Senator. On behalf of the Parliament Office, I would like to encourage members to contribute to the Faces of Cancer initiative by giving a monetary donation towards the growth and development of the organization and its members, later known as the Cancer Warriors. A box has been placed in the lounge. Feel free to place your generous contributions during lunchtime and after our day's sittings. Senators, remember what they say, give and it will come back to you 100-fold. Okay. Join me in extending belated birthday wishes to our Reverend Smart. She had to rush out, whose birthday was on Saturday, 25th November. Parliament's audio technician, Mr. Norman Shalmine, is still recovering from the vehicular accident, and we wish him speedy recovery. Statements from ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Papers to be laid. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. Before I proceed with the papers to be laid, I just want to join you in welcoming back our two senators, temporary that is, for now, Senators Daniel and Senator Charles, and welcome our new Senator Jean-Pierre. I also wish the join in congratulating our Senator Jawahir on her recent success in the movement, the regional movement towards the empowerment of women in the Parliament. And while I listened and you did mention at some point, I heard at least once that there was something that included the men. I just want to acknowledge that in this chamber, by the sheer numbers, there's a good gender balance, which I think augurs well for the business of the country. Madam President, I wish to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 125 of 2023, Invest St. Lucia, Bruceville, Vieux-Fort Vesting Order. Statutory Instrument Number 126 of 2023, Tourism Incentives, Pinnacle St. Lucia Limited Order. Statutory Instrument Number 127 of 2023, Firearms Certification of Ballistic Expert Notice. Statutory Instrument Number 128 of 2023, Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court Bail Rules, Statutory Instrument number 129 of 2023, Price Control Amendment number 14, order. Statutory Instrument number 130 of 2023, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1, number 15, order. Statutory Instrument number 131 of 2023, Public Finance Management Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital and current expenditure to enhance the resilience of the St. Lucia Fire Service. Statutory Instrument number 132 of 2023, Public Finance Management Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital and current expenditure to support the Youth Economy Project. Statutory Instrument number 133 of 2023, Public Procurement Regulations. Statutory Instrument number 134 of 2023, Legal Profession Eligibility, Destiny Denisha Pascal Order. Statutory Instrument number 135 of 2023, Price Control Amendment number 15, order. Statutory Instrument number 136 of 2023, Legal Profession Eligibility, Amilcar Branch, order. Statutory Instrument number 137 of 2023, Legal Profession Eligibility. I read that one already, so we move to 135. Statutory Instrument number 135 of 2023, Security Interest of Movable Property Act, commencement order. Statutory Instrument number 138 of 2023, Price Control Amendment number 16, order. Statutory Instrument number 139 of 2023, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1, number 16, order. Statutory Instrument number 140 of 2023, Public Debt Management Act, commencement order. Statutory Instrument number 141 of 2023, Legal Profession Eligibility, Kenisha Andine Chase order. Statutory Instrument number 142 of 2023, Tourism Incentives, the St. Lucian Hub order. Statutory Instrument number 143 of 2023, Income Tax Exemption, St. Lucia Linen Services Limited order. Statutory Instrument number 144 of 2023, Income Tax Exemption, Special Prosecutor order. Statutory Instrument number 145 of 2023, Price Control Amendment number 17, order. Statutory Instrument number 146 of 2023, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1, number 17, order.
Motions? Do you need a moment? Motions? Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President, for your patience. After these statutory instruments, I needed a pause to sort out my documents. Madam President, I wish to present the following motion standing in my name. Whereas under Section 109(1) of the value and 109(1)(a) of the Value Added Tax Cap 1542, the Act, it is provided that the Minister of Finance may, by order published in the Gazette, amend the schedules of the Act. And whereas it is further provided under the Act, Section 1092 of the Act, that the order made pursuant to Section 109(1) of the Act is subject to an affirmative resolution of Parliament, except where the amendment is to customs tariffs headings only. And whereas the Minister of Finance seeks approval of the draft Value Added Tax Amendment Schedule 3, number 3, order to amend Schedule 3 of the Act by an affirmative resolution of Parliament. 2A. Exempt imports of personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household consumables contained in barrels for the period commencing from the first day of November 2023 and terminating on the 29th day of February 2024. B. Exempt import of toys, food supplies, and care packages by a member of the House of Assembly for the benefit of children, the vulnerable, and needy persons in the constituency of the member of the House of Assembly for the period commencing from the 1st day of November 2023 and terminating the 31st day of January 2024. Be it resolved that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3, Number 3, Order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to A. Exempt imports of personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household consumables contained in barrels for the period commencing from the 1st day of November 2023 and terminating on the 29th day of February 2024. B. Exempt imports of toys, food supplies, and care packages by a member of the House of Assembly for the benefit of children, the vulnerable, and needy persons in the constituency of the member of the House of Assembly for the period commencing from the 1st day of November 2023 and terminating on the 31st day of January 2024. Madam President, just to elaborate a little bit on the background to this motion, I think we are all familiar by now with the customary gesture that governments over the last quite a few years have been making to ensure that our people, not only politicians, but we know that barrels is a way of our friends and family and persons in the diaspora who during the Christmas season provide or take the opportunity to provide some kind of support and good cheer to our citizens. And we believe that this gesture by the government is once again making those concessions available, particularly when it relates to members of Parliament on both sides who wish to take the opportunity to assist constituents. We know that during the Christmas time, constituencies, MPs have parties, they have different ways in which they reach out to their constituents during the festive season. And so this is just a routine amendment that is made at that time to extend that courtesy to MPs. So we believe that it is timely, and we hope that the MPs take advantage of the opportunity to be able to bring some good cheer to constituents around the island during the festive season.
Senators, the question is that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3, Number 3, Order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to A. Exempt imports of personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household consumables contained in barrels for the period commencing from the 1st day of November 2023 and terminating on the 29th day of February 2024. B. Exempt imports of toys and food supplies and care packages by a member of the House of Assembly for the benefit of children, the vulnerable and needy persons in the constituency of the member of the House of Assembly for the period commencing from the 1st day of November 2023 and terminating on the 31st day of January 2024. Senator Fede.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I want to welcome the new Senator, Mrs. Laura Japira Noel, to the chamber this morning. I think this is your first time in the chamber. Senator Nancy is no stranger to the House. Madam President, I rise to make a very important contribution at this time on this motion laid in this House by the Leader of Government Business. Madam President, the St. Lucia Labour Party administration has once again betrayed the people of St. Lucia. Why I say that, Madam President, is that the Leader of Government Business came to say that we are here to do the routine, traditional Christmas barrel exercise. The opposition sees this rather differently, Madam President, in that we understand that times are not normal. This is not just a Christmas barrel exercise. When people are suffering in the manner that they are, this cannot be business as usual. It cannot be just an exercise so that MPs can have Christmas parties and have a festive time and enjoy themselves with their constituents. No, this has to take a deeper look, Madam President, as to the situation in the country right now, how people are reeling against a global inflation problem, which the government has referenced in so many instances to make excuses as to why certain things are not done. So we know, Madam President, that at this time, this can't just be a barrel coming in for Christmas, but this must be seen as bringing relief to people who are suffering in the country. And it is with that view that the United Workers' Party approaches this debate. And so, Madam President, first of all, the motion says that this is as of November 1. And I'm asking myself, why is it coming to the Senate or the House so late? Does it mean that people are going to get retroactive rebates for duties that they have paid on Christmas barrels, if that's the case? Or does it mean that this government, as they have done on so many instances, is totally another case of them mismanaging a very simple situation? To bring a motion to Parliament, to come to the House, seek the necessary concessions so that the people can get the relief. Madam President, I am on record of saying, when we did this the last time, that the inflation rate in the country, and knowing that the rising cost of living has affected so many people, that we could not look at this exercise as just a routine Christmas barrel. I'm again going to use this platform to call on the Honorable House to extend this measure towards the end of June. Madam President, the people in this country are suffering to make ends meet. You go to the supermarkets and prices are out of control, way out of control, way out of the reach of many families. And so this is a great opportunity for people to be able to bring in food, hopefully cheaper. Because, Madam President, I must tell you that, and I'm getting to that it's also very difficult for families overseas from their source markets where this barrel is going to come from. But I'm going to get to that in a moment. But I want to focus now on the recipient of these Christmas barrels and what they are going through at present and their own plight. They have seen increases, Madam President, in the price of bread. They have seen increases in the price of bus fares. They have seen big food increases in LPG gas, Madam President. I think I bought a 20-something pound cylinder and it was nearing $40. Electricity bill, Madam President, the Social Economic Review told us that it's risen by 30%. That's a huge number for most families to be able to live and to deal with those issues. Madam President, the food in the supermarket, while the government told us that the 2.5% tax will not affect food, people are seeing price increases in the supermarkets, Madam President. It is extremely difficult to live in St. Lucia right now. And a Christmas barrel, which this motion addresses, Madam President, or to give them the opportunity to bring in food, to bring in clothing, of which clothing now, based on the tax, it does get the tax. So now by bringing in the barrel, you give them an opportunity to get a break from the 2.5% tax and get a break from the VAT that it is coming in at. But Madam President, food in the supermarket, very expensive. I see people go to the supermarkets and it's not fun. It used to be fun back in the day. You know, your parents take you for a little trip, and you know, it brought joy to parents to buy chocolates and to buy nice things for their kids. It's extremely difficult now for people to afford that. And a lot of people now go to the supermarket without the children. And that's a strategic move by parents, because they know that if they visit with kids, it becomes that much more expensive. You see a lot more baskets these days in the supermarkets than you see trolleys, because food is out of control. And you know, I'm very sorry that I have to keep harping on this, because it's important, Madam President. It's important that these matters are raised, because under the St. Lucia Labour Party, the 2.5% tax and the lack of measures to shelter the vulnerable people from these inflation measures, the people of this country are suffering. And it is in that context we come today, Madam President, to bring about some measure of relief. And I'm frankly disappointed by how limited this measure is, because this measure is supposed to take into account the difficult and grave situation that families have found themselves in this country today because of an ongoing global inflation problem. Madam President, I also wonder about people who do not have a Christmas barrel. They may have relatives overseas, and those relatives, they are faced with their own economic challenges. If you review the economic situation in the world right now, we look at what's happening in the UK and the US, where we have a lot of family members tied to St. Lucian families. And you will see, Madam President, that in the case of the United Kingdom, they have had one of the worst inflation rates in the world. In that, Madam President, their inflation rate in 2023, between 2022 and March of 2022, experienced double digits. And so our families in the US are also going through tough times. They have seen cost of living grown by as much as 9.1% in 2022. It had been at 7% in some times during 2023. So what we've seen are increases in gas bills, in energy bills. It's now the winter season. When you talk to friends in the UK, Madam President, instead of having the heat on for an extended amount of time, they ration how they put on the heater in the house, because we have an energy crisis in the world. And so it's very difficult for our families in the UK who are dealing with their own circumstances. And we see on television, Madam President, that there are marches in places like the UK where we have family members, where people are saying, look, it really is very difficult on us. The prices of food, the prices of energy, the cost of living has gone out of control, that we need the governments to do something about salaries. Because if they don't do something about salaries, we are going to be crushed under the might of this inflation problem, which is gripping all of us. And so that situation in the UK, in the US, that's going to have an impact on the Christmas barrels that they can send. That's going to have an impact on their ability to be able to prop us up in the Caribbean. And so if the government of St. Lucia is going to come with a measure like this one, I would expect that the government would not ignore the fact that the people of the country are suffering at this time. This is not going to be the best Christmas for most people. This is going to be a very, very, very tough Christmas. This is going to be a Christmas of high increased prices. And regardless of how many Black Friday sales there are, people just don't have the money to afford things that are being sold at courts and at various places because it's just really, really, really hard on the population. And then to make matters worse, Madam President, is that the government has exacerbated this problem on the local populace by mismanaging important economic sectors like construction and tourism, where people could have gotten some bit of reprieve from the monies that they would have earned in those sectors so that they can afford the high cost of living that is hampering all of our families in this country. And we see that tourism is significantly down. It's one of the worst summers we've had, Madam President. It shows that June was down significantly. It's shown that July and August were also down. June 12%, July 20%, August 16%. It means that the tourism worker in this country is suffering because they're getting less hours. And so they will have to rely more on Christmas barrels. And instead of you making it easier and a longer period for their families overseas to give them those Christmas barrels, you have limited now to 3 months, because the month of November has already gone. And you know, I stand here and I wonder how many times that maybe customs have had conflicts with people who have brought in barrels under the premise that this government may have said that June 1, the barrels can come in duty free, but there's no law to cause it to happen from June 1. So from November 1, sorry. So it means that you can't even manage a Christmas barrel program, and yet you want to manage a country. A simple thing like this, you cannot manage it, right? So here we are, today being 2 days left in the month of November, right? And you are coming and you don't even have the decency to change the date on the bill. To say, well, look, it says November 1, right? Why would we pass a bill to take effect November 1 and today is November 28th? This is gross mismanagement. So not even trying to help the people that you could get this right. Look, for example, we laid a bill here in this house, Madam President, the Tourism Development Bill, in keeping with the same level of mismanagement. And up to now, the opposition does not have a copy of the bill. But yet it's laid in the parliament. And then the excuse is it's not being debated. We want a copy of the bill. Stop mismanaging the parliament in this way. Stop mismanaging the country in this way.
Stay on track. Stay on track. Stay on track, please.
We are on track.
You are saying stop mismanaging the parliament in this way. Stay on track.
Madam President, if today is the 28th of November, and this motion says effective the 1st of November, what do you call that? I call that mismanagement. That is my opinion. They have mismanaged the parliament. They have mismanaged the affairs of this country. This is an important measure, Madam President,
Senator
to
Fede.
give the poor people.
Senator Fede, I repeat, we are in charge of the parliament, and I repeat to you, if you're speaking about government policies, government initiatives, move forward and stay on that track. Please divorce parliament and government initiatives. Proceed.
So this important measure, which is supposed to bring relief to the poor people of this country, has been grossly mismanaged. So you don't even have the decency to say, in lieu of the fact that we are late, let's try to extend it by 1 more month. And even when you do that, that's not adequate. And that's what I get at, right? Everything is last minute with the St. Lucia Labour Party administration, where they, look, I mean, you can't get rice now in the supermarket. So I hope that the government brings in rice. I hope that you will allow rice to come in the Christmas barrels as well. And we've had before that shortages of sugar. You can't even import sugar and rice properly that the poor people of this country rely on for their sustenance, and you want me to trust you with the bigger overall management of the country. So Madam President, I am very sorry to tell you that I feel so sorry for the people of St. Lucia. I have not seen in the United Workers' Party so many requests from people from all walks of life for assistance in so many levels, because things are hard in this country. I mean, I was speaking to a lady from Denver recently who's a single mother, Madam President. And, you know, she comes to mind because she has a 2-year-old son. And her 2-year-old son, she fell ill. And she wanted to go and to buy some medication. And she said, Mr. Fede, when I got to the drugstore and I saw the price of medication in the pharmacy, I said, I'm going to leave that right there. But you see, Madam President, it's not just leaving the medication right there. It is the fact that here is a young 2-year-old boy who needs help, who needs medication, and finds it difficult because of his mother's earning power, an unemployed mother. And so this unemployed mother from Dennery needs this Christmas Barrel program to do right by them, to make sure that this is extended for as long as possible. Not many families are going to be able to recoup a Christmas Barrel in such a short space of time. Madam President, I've heard referenced in the lower house the drought that we've had in the Panama Canal and how that has exacerbated the supply chain issues that we are facing. No doubt we're going to have a big demand for shipping services during the holiday season. I'm just wondering now that if the barrel has not been shipped, whether the barrel will make it to St. Lucia for Christmas. And so it really beats me as to how this government organizes and manages, and whether they take into account all of the steps and all of the hindrances that are standing in the way of them. Madam President, we're having this discussion, which I think is very important, at a time when the Social Economic Review records that St. Lucia has the highest rate of inflation in the Eastern Caribbean. The third highest rate of inflation in the Eastern Caribbean at 6.4%, Madam President. It means, Madam President, that we are among the worst in terms of how we have managed the cost of living in the country, in the OECS. It means, Madam President, that countries like St. Kitts and Grenada, which are below 3% of the inflation rate, it means that their governments have had better policies in managing the rise in cost of living on the backs of their citizens. And that is what I call leadership, Madam President. And so, if we cannot get a simple thing like just getting the Christmas Barrel concessions on time, I don't expect that this government will have policies. I think what's needed now are more than Christmas barrels. We need increased measures in this country. We need to give the farmers input so that they can increase production in the country. You go to the supermarkets, there are no lettuce. You have imported lettuce on the shelf. The romaine lettuce and a bag is $26, Madam President. So the Christmas barrels can't solve the vegetables problem. Tomatoes that are short in the country can't be solved by Christmas barrels. So the government has a lot of work to do, Madam President, to make sure that they boost the production of agriculture so that the people of St. Lucia can have reprieve on the high prices that they're seeing in the supermarkets. We gave them a 6-point plan as to how to reduce the cost of living. We said, give the farmers seeds, give them a guaranteed market, mobilize the marketing board, and to create linkages between hotels and supermarkets so that the farmers can have sustained markets. We said to them, look, during COVID, we too had this problem of high cost of living, of a country where, for example, people weren't earning. There were 15,000 people who were out of work. And what we had to do during COVID was to help 7,000 families with their electricity bills. And when they ask where did the money for COVID go, right, we were busy helping 7,000 families pay their electricity bills who were out of work during COVID. We did it. And those were very tough times, Madam President. Those were very tough times when we saw that the revenues of this country were significantly reduced. We saw that the revenue went down by 24% in the country. Today, Madam President, they are recording the highest amount of tax revenue in the history of any government, but they cannot give the people food vouchers. And so when, Madam President, you have a problem of high inflation rates, what's going to happen to the families that do not have Christmas barrels? What are you doing to help them? What are you doing to help those people who don't have relatives in the United States? Or those people who have relatives, but their relatives might be currently unemployed and might be on food stamps in the United States, and so therefore they're unable to send the Christmas barrels. We want the government to reason with those people and to come up with solutions to help them as well get by in this rather difficult time. And so we told them, Madam President, that construction was a stimulus during COVID. What they have done, instead of allowing the jobs to come by out of the construction industry, they have stopped numerous projects because of politics. And that's why I say that they do not care, Madam President. That's why I say that all they are concerned about is protecting their victories. And so we must now, when we come to do measures like these, the Christmas barrel measure, it cannot be seen as a traditional measure. It must be seen as an opportunity to help. It must be seen as an opportunity to assist. It must be seen as an opportunity to bring hope to people in the country. It must be seen as an opportunity to help the otherwise helpless that do not have a Christmas barrel, that do not have relatives who are well-to-do to send them the goodies and Nike shoes and all of that stuff, right? What are you doing to help the vulnerable of the country? How many people are getting work in the STEP program? Are these people all St. Lucia Labour Party supporters? Or do you have a good mix? Because poverty and the inflation rate, Madam President, right, does not have political colors. Every single person, regardless of political persuasion, is suffering in this country right now. And so, Madam President, when we are going to bring measures, we have to take a holistic approach to make sure that we can help every single person in this country. And so, I don't see a rosy Christmas. When the minister said festive, I see the opposite of festive. I see people that are going to have a difficult time this Christmas. And I'm not hoping for it. I hope I'm wrong. Because what I ultimately would like to see, Madam President, is a greater level of reprieve to the citizenry of this country. So, Madam President, I am very, very concerned. And I believe that once again, the St. Lucia Labour Party administration, they have betrayed the people of this country, especially the vulnerable citizens. They do not even have the decency to take this to up to June at least, so that people can have a good 6 months to get an opportunity to bring in their supplies. Already you have a lot of people, Madam President, barrel or not, they're already buying things overseas. Because when you go now, a Colgate in the supermarket is the late 20s. You know, deodorant that you used to buy for $10 is now way out of the roof. That people, I mean, it's very expensive. And so a lot of people are already buying stuff online, right? So this measure should not be seen in the context of just a Christmas barrel so that MPs can bring in toys and can bring in food supplies so that they can go around the constituency. No, it has to go wider than that. It has to ensure that it has a holistic and broader view, is what I'm saying from the opposition. So, Madam President, I thank you for your indulgence, and I will stop here for now.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, for the last, I think it was about 20 or 25 minutes, I endured a similar charade that took place a few days ago. In presenting the motion, I indicated that it was meant for a particular period. It was meant for Christmas, and there was a certain reason why it's been done, and it has been done before. But as is customary, the leader of opposition business, he must read from the script that is prepared. He must repeat and mimic the actions and behavior of his leader. And so he comes to the Senate this morning with a premeditated, pre-planned assault on a measure that is customary, that has happened for a very long time. Even during COVID, when things were very bad, even when we had his government in office, and finds that everything is wrong with the measure, and now he wants Christmas in June. Christmas must now be extended to June. Madam President, I want to remind the leader of opposition business that once, not too long ago, I sat in the opposition chair where Senator Charles sits today, and stood and debated on that very motion when he sat in cabinet and his government, I hope he's hearing me, the government that he was part of, came to this house 3 weeks, Madam President, a mere 3 weeks before Christmas, to pass that amendment. 3 weeks before Christmas, he was in cabinet. At that time, I remembered we had 6 opposition MPs who made the point that they were unfairly disadvantaged because, of course, in cabinet you would have known, so they had the opportunity to have ordered their toys, to have ordered everything. And it was unfair that they had no opportunity 3 weeks before Christmas to be able to make an effort to get anything for their constituents. But today, Madam President, the opposition will pretend that we have no memory and St. Lucians have forgotten. We are coming here in November to make an amendment that they made 3 weeks before Christmas. In December, I was sitting on that bench, and I remembered standing. I was not an MP, so I couldn't speak for constituents, but I spoke on what that meant to the people of the country. And he finds that it is too late, and it should be extended to June. Well, Madam President, just for the benefit of this chamber, I wanted to remind the leader of opposition business of this particular issue. Then he went on to mention that in the UK and in the diaspora, people may be finding it difficult to be able to even send something across. That is an interesting point, because he had just indicated that it appears that in St. Lucia is the only place where you have issues with the cost of living and where people have difficulty in getting goods and services because we are doing so bad. But then in the same breath, he can raise an issue about other countries that have similar struggles. So it is obvious that we're not the only ones that inflation is affecting. In fact, Madam President, he went on in his very same presentation to mention, which I don't know if he intended to, but sometimes, you know, when you say certain things, you might involuntarily make certain comments, that there is a global inflation problem. Well, there is a global inflation problem, full stop. Global does not reside or does not mean it's a St. Lucia inflation problem. Inflation affects everyone. So it was very interesting that after having bashed the government and made everything seem that, you know, the only reason we have inflation is because St. Lucia Labour Party is in government in St. Lucia, that he could have mentioned that there is a global inflation problem. And to suggest that the people in the UK may have issues even sending barrels. Well, that definitely took care of his first argument. Madam President, in traditional fashion, in his usual fashion, not sticking to the motion, and I realize you had to pull him back, he tried to go all around the world and find other topics that have been ventilated on their platforms to bring into this chamber. And so he went after salaries and saying that instead of giving concessions on barrels, and I don't want to quote him, I paraphrase here, that we should be getting better salaries for St. Lucians. We have stood in this house, Madam President, and we have agreed that our government is not in any way opposed.
Madam President, I rise on a point of order. The member is misquoting me and misleading the House. I never said that you ought to give the people of St. Lucia better salaries. I said to you that right now, the salaries have not kept pace with the inflation problem. We've seen marches in the UK where people are saying that they need a salary increase.
Is that a point of clarification?
I'm on the floor.
Take a seat, Senator.
Right? I've said that.
I think you made the point, Senator.
Yes.
Thank you very much. You may take your seat.
Thank you, Madam President. And you notice I took my seat immediately. When you instructed me, I sat immediately because I respect the chair and I hope the opposition starts to pay attention. Leader of government business, take your seat. I sat. Madam President, subject to correction, I may have not used his exact words, but the point was made that we should do something about salaries. Let me put it this way. And I'm saying to the leader of opposition business that this government is the government that after his government negotiated and did not pay the increase to the public servants, we have done so. We have done so, even in the face of the inflation and the difficulties that we face today, and all the debt that we've inherited from his government. We have done so. And now negotiations are in the next phase. Madam President, I want to remind the opposition, leader of opposition business, that it is this government on Wednesday, not even Thursday, on Wednesday last week, our pensioners received $600 increase. This is the government that did that, understanding the situation. And our teachers in August received $600 additional dollars to the $5 that they have, $1,100 in their TMA, teacher materials allowance. Of course we understand that the teachers will need to spend a little more if they have to be able to deal with the materials. This is the government that has done so. And even if he tries to play the Grinch for Christmas to give a gloom and doom picture, this Grinch role will not work, because our St. Lucian culture, our St. Lucian folk will continue to celebrate and enjoy their Christmas. So don't come here and try to create a shadow, cast a shadow over Christmas and say that they're not going to have a Merry Christmas and suggest in any way that Christmas is not going to be what it should be. Madam President, all of a sudden, the opposition, not only on this matter, but on other platforms and on other issues, have assumed or are trying, they cannot because they can only trying to assume the role of the champions of the poor, the champions of the less fortunate, the champions of single mothers. I heard the leader of opposition business, not in his chair as usual, perhaps going to take his calls and instructions to come back for the next motion. I'm just speculating here, Madam President. Suggesting that they are the champions of poor people, the champions of the less fortunate. And he related his story with the single mother, was it? He met in Dennery. That's his story, so I can't doubt that it happened. and the single mother with the child and what happens to her and so on. Madam President, I want to remind the leader of opposition business. I want to just ask him, because I will never repeat those words. What did his then Prime Minister and leader say about single mothers who are having more than one child? We have not forgotten, Madam President. So today you want to come and posture as if you are the champion of single mothers and the poor. We understand the plight of single mothers and the less fortunate on this side. And that is why we have put policies in place to assist them. That is why we have paid attention to mothers, pregnant mothers getting certain medical checkups and the ultrasounds without having to pay. We understand that. We understand that. And so before the opposition takes a motion that is simply meant to create an opportunity during the festive season and drags it all over the place, we want to remind them that the things that they're trying to point to this government are the things that they would have done. So, Madam President, without taking on all the other irrelevant issues that were raised on this debate, because we have a long day, I want to just mention two more things. One, that the leader of opposition business made a particular reference, and he likes to use the social and economic review. He believes that the social and economic review is available to him only. And I have, on several occasions in this chamber, I have showed him up when he tries to misquote information from the social and economic review. He has gone downstairs to the library and couldn't come back with the information. And today, he uses the social and economic review, tried to say that we had the highest inflation rate in the Caribbean, but when I seem to have been prepared to challenge it, he said, no, the third highest. But you know what he didn't remember to say, Madam President? That St. Lucia, aside from Guyana, who now I know that they have oil, St. Lucia's economy has registered the highest growth rate in the OECS. He didn't say that. He'll point to the inflation. He tried the first, he said highest and then moved to third. So I don't know which one it is. But he didn't tell you about the growth. And this is why we are able to inject some of what is happening back into the people's hands and in their pockets. Finally, Madam President, I heard the leader of opposition business making reference to STEP. What we call STEP, the short-term employment program or stimulus program. I am bewildered that any member of this opposition can stand up and call for STEP to be given to all and not only one group of persons, but everybody. First of all, they are the biggest critics of the program. They actually went on a campaign against it and found everything wrong with it. But they found it useful to be able to change the name and give benefits to certain people. And I want to remind the opposition that in this particular government's case, there are 17 MPs. 17. 2 of them are opposition MPs. And I live in a constituency where an opposition MP is the elected member. And I can tell you that all 17 of these MPs receive allocations for that program. All 17. And he can go in the next few weeks when this program begins, he can go around the constituencies and he will see St. Lucians who support both political parties at work and benefiting from that program. That's a fact. One of his, the MP from Choiseul Saltibus even stood up and gave an account, quoted the figure that he was receiving for his community development allowance. He could have stood there in a Labour Party government and say what his allocation is. Was it 100,000 per quarter? He could stand up here as an opposition MP and say he's getting $100,000 per quarter. That's what, 400,000 for the year? Minimum. And all the other social programs that this government runs, they are run for the entire 17. Every seat in this chamber is represented and gets the allocation. And so, to come and suggest when you are debating a motion to amend to allow barrels to come in with certain incentives. To go around and talk about all of those things, it really tells me that the opposition is not willing to debate the issues. They are not interested in that. They have their own script, and I know that during the course of today, what was not achieved in the lower house, they will try to achieve. But I will remind the opposition that we are still focused and we are still here. And we will make sure that anytime they stray away, anytime they provide any mistruth or any attempt to misrepresent the information, we will be right there to put it on track. And so, Madam President, I want to again remind this chamber that this amendment has a particular purpose. It is to provide some kind of relief during the festive season, which does not extend to June. Christmas in St. Lucia, as far as I know, is in December and has continued to be so. And if the opposition feels that they need to be extended to June, what they need to do is to win the election, become the government, be around the country, and extend it year-round if they want. I will enjoy it too. Okay? So I wish they would do that, and don't come to the House to try to suggest to St. Lucians that Christmas is in June, because Christmas still remains in December. I thank you, Madam President.
Senators, the question is that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment to Schedule 3, Number 3 order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act 2A, exempt imports of personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household consumables contained in barrels for the period commencing from the first day of November 2023 and terminating on the 29th day of February 2024. B, exempt imports of toys, food supplies, and care packages by a member of the House of Assembly for the benefit of children, the vulnerable, and needy persons in the constituency of the member of the House of Assembly for the period commencing from the first day of November 2023 and terminating on the 31st day of January 2024. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided under Section 63(1) of the Public Finance Management Act, Cap 1501, the Act, that the Minister of Finance may, by affirmative resolution of Parliament, borrow from a bank and or other financial institution for the capital or current expenditure of government. And whereas it is further provided under Section 64 of the Act that money borrowed from the government must be paid into and form part of the consolidated fund. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow an amount of US $6 million, the loan, from the African Export-Import Bank to finance the construction of social infrastructure and other facilities damaged or destroyed by Tropical Storm Brett under the Educational Rehabilitation Climate-Linked Facility. And whereas the loan is repayable for 7 years, commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 2 years. And whereas the loan is repayable in equal semi-annual installments of a 30th day of June and the 31st day of December of each year, after the grace period. And whereas interest is payable at a rate of 6% per annum, be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $6 million, the loan, from the African Export-Import Bank to finance the construction of social infrastructure and other facilities damaged or destroyed by Tropical Storm Brett under the Education Rehabilitation Climate-Linked Facility. Be it further resolved that A, the loan is repayable in 7 years, commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 2 years. B, the loan is repayable in equal semi-annual installments on the 30th day of June and the 30th day of December of each year after the grace period. C. Interest is payable at a rate of 6% per annum. Mic is on. Madam President, by way of further elaboration or explanation of this bill, this motion, Madam President, seeks to secure about 6 million US, about exactly 6 million US, about 16.2 million EC dollars from the Import-Export Bank of the African Import-Export Bank. And you would note, Madam President, that it's a non-traditional source of revenue or income that the government is working with. That symbolizes our willingness to engage in more South-South cooperation and looking towards the alternative. We know of the World Bank and the IMF and the traditional ones, and we know the fiscal situation and what all of these terms and conditions are. So that is one point of note. Madam President, the purpose of this loan is to really address an issue that, for me, I can relate to because of my background. Having been a manager of a school plant where the son of one of our senators spent 5 years with me, Senator Charles, and Senator Charles, for having been part of my parent-teacher association and giving support to the school, would have known and experienced firsthand what it was like to be able to make it comfortable for students, teachers, and other persons at the school to be able to operate and offer our children quality education. Year after year, we have had different ministers for education, different governments, and school plant management, both in terms of construction and in terms of maintenance, has been a real challenge. Different governments have taken different approaches. There was one time it was under the Ministry of Education through a particular unit, I think it was plant and equipment, and then there was a change to infrastructure where it was felt that infrastructure was better placed to manage the technical aspect of it. Then it was brought back to education. But as a result, despite all of those moves, Madam President, the school plants in this country have always had serious challenges in terms of their maintenance. We still have issues with making them compliant with expectations that include the students with disabilities, for example, where there are certain schools where on certain floors you can't even access because there's no room. We have certain basic amenities that are not available in many of our schools. The issue of smart classrooms is one of them that has emerged. So this loan, Madam President, really is geared towards giving serious attention to our school plant and to try to make the school environment safer and more comfortable for students to learn. And as an education practitioner, I can tell you, the theory or the research has definitely suggested that if children are comfortable and they are safe, they are more likely to do well, to do better. If they are uncomfortable, if they are hot, if they are distracted by the various issues, the elements, then it is less likely that they will be able to concentrate. So I think that this is a move that is necessary. Now, we wish we could have had more because I think, if you ask me, sometimes I wonder if the minister wants the entire cut budget for education. And I can understand why, because there's so much that we can do. I remembered the former Minister for Education, my good friend, Dr. Rigobert, had, in a conversation both here and outside, had indicated that $10 million was allocated for her schools. And she was very excited to mention it. but didn't take very long for her to realize that even that was not sufficient. So it is very important for us to make sure that when we secure funding to repair and maintain our schools, that it is done and used in a way that can be very impactful. And so, Madam President, what was done? How did we arrive at what we need to do and which schools should be engaged first? There was a proper, thorough assessment done, and that is why it took us a little time, because you cannot just decide you're going to do school X, Y, and Z at random. There was a proper assessment that was done on the entire physical school plant in the country by the technical persons, both from planning and education. And it was found that about 16 schools needed immediate attention out of many, many more. And some of those schools, it was bordering on the student safety and the staff. And these schools were selected based on that assessment. I just want to give you a little background on some of the schools and why. Madam President, one of the schools was the Entry Post-Secondary School, which started as a junior secondary school from 1972. Some of us here were not born yet. And I know the principal and I had a good relationship. I've been to that school, and I know the issues that he has had. Even at National Principals Association meetings, I recall some of the issues that he has raised. And they were never attended to. I'm not going to blame anyone and say that it was any doctrine that caused it not to be done, but I think it is about time that be addressed. Madam President, the Grand Riviere Secondary School in the Mabuya Valley is another one. Remember, this school used to be a senior primary school, and they have done some change in terms of the offerings. And these schools, and that particular school, has quite a lot of timber structures, especially the admin block, that I am again familiar with, that has become termite infested. And as we know in this country, everywhere you have wooden structures, you always have to deal with termites. And in some cases, it is not financially viable and wise to keep repairing termite-infested structures, because it just keeps coming back. So it may require demolishing the entire structure, treating the soil, and then erecting concrete structures so that you don't have to be spending much more money on maintenance. Another school, Madam President, that was mentioned, and I want you to note the constituencies. When the opposition comes to talk about, we're doing things, note the constituencies the schools are coming from. Another one is the OJ Combined School. And I think the MP has mentioned that he has had to intervene on his own to assist. The PRO Combined School, that is one of the schools in the South that has a very good reputation in terms of their performance. And it's a very large school, but predominantly wooden structures again, same problem. The Reunion Primary School, there were some issues with electricals, that's in Choiseul. Note on opposition constituency. And I remember the MP being very pleased that that school was being attended to, because he has raised these issues. The Viewfort Comprehensive Secondary School, that we know is one of our top schools on the island in the South, having an A-level department, over 1,000 students, and I see my colleague there smiling. I suspect she went to Viewfort Compre. So it has expanded and now requires attention. We also have to now include an additional vice principal, telling you that the challenges continue with administration and the structure. Madam President, these are some of the schools that I just mentioned that will be getting attention, and there are others. I also want to raise the issue that in addition to the physical structure being attended to, there are other programs and other initiatives that this intervention will complement. Madam President, I also have to mention Soufriere Comprehensive. That one is another one that has had some serious issues. In addition to paying attention to the school plant, it is always important to pay attention to what is going on within the school. And that is why there's also expenditure that has to come from to focus on the climate resilience of these schools. And in terms of the designs and what will be done, these repairs and these construction projects will be taken into consideration climate resilience. In fact, these tend to be one of the conditions to secure loans these days anyway. Everything you want, they will ask you, what is your plan for climate resistance? If you can't show it, you get no money. Pardon the slang, Madam President. So it also complements, as I said, what is going on within the school structure, and that is the instructional component. The instructional component including technology in the classroom, and that is why the laptop program is so important, because it complements. It's no point building a nice classroom, putting everything nice in it, and when you want to do the actual instruction, the students will have the tools to learn. It doesn't make sense. So it has to be complemented with proper smart classrooms. There will be 6 pre-kindergarten programs using the excess classroom spaces that exist in our schools to complement that. To complement that also, the government is also embarking on the first generation scholarships, and that is at the higher level, where students who come from families where nobody has been able to access tertiary education can have an opportunity to at least be one of the first persons in that family generation to have access to tertiary education. Madam President, again, complementing these infrastructure programs are the instructional programs that the government is investing in at our schools. Fencing is one of them. Security. School security has become an issue. We have heard of incidents where people from the outside have trespassed and have found themselves on school compounds. I can relate to that. It has happened at my school, and you have to be careful with safety of students. And so some of the schools have had issues with being properly fenced, and that is one of the initiatives that will be taken up with that borrowing. So, Madam President, I want to just wrap up here by saying that an investment in our children and in our schools is an investment in our next generation. When those of us here who are busy going back and forth about what should be done and how, when we have retired into our chairs, it is this generation that is going to take charge of this country and pay our pension. So I hope they'll be able to give us more than 600 and do more than what we are proposing to do. Because if we do not take care of them, if we do not invest in their education, if we do not invest in their development, then I don't have to tell you what will happen. And so it is vital that we emphasize that this particular motion seeks to put our students in our schools, our teachers, our principals, our ancillary staff, and parents who invest in these students. It seeks to put them first. It seeks to suggest that they are vital resources, our human resources that we need to invest in. And I look forward to the support for this motion, and ask that the House gives its support so that we can move on and secure those funds on behalf of the people, the children of our country. I thank you, Madam President.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $6 million, the loan, from the African Export-Import Bank of Finance to finance the construction of social infrastructure and other facilities damaged or destroyed by Tropical Storm Brett under the Education Rehabilitation Climate-Linked Facility. Be it further resolved that A, the loan is repayable in 7 years commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 2 years. B, the loan is repayable in equal semi-annual installments on the 30th day of June and the 31st day of December of each year after the grace period. And C, interest is payable at a rate of 6% per annum. Senator Fede.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Madam President. I rise to comment on this bill. Again, some very important points have been raised. I know that the amount of $6 million may appear to be a small amount. And I think by his own admission, the leader of government business would have alluded to the fact that the school plans of the country, they do suck a lot of money like a vacuum, and they are in such a dilapidated state, Madam President, that we require a lot more for us to adequately repair them and to bring them to a state of respectability. Madam President, this motion does intrigue me in a number of ways, because I remember when we came into government back in 2016, and I had just become the MP of Ancillary Canneries. And Madam President, we had about 7 or 8 schools between primary and infant and kindergarten schools within the constituency. But Madam President, the common problem which existed were a number of leaking roofs. You had a situation where teachers were using dustbins and buckets to catch water when it rained, and students were scampering for shelter, causing a total disruption to classrooms all across the constituency. And then, Madam President, upon discussion with many of my colleagues, I then realized that this wasn't just an Ancillary Canneries problem, that it had become a national problem, where the school plants have been so neglected that they needed a significant amount of work to bring them to a state of respectability. When we looked at the budget at the time, which the then St. Lucia Labour Party administration had passed, and despite all of their talk about education and their being champions for education, Madam President, the count nationally suggested that there were 100 school plants on the island, between secondary schools, infant schools, preschools, primary schools, and the whole list of them. And the educator has informed me that it is more than 100. So, and so, Madam President, they were spending $1 million on an annual basis. And at that time, the Ministry of Infrastructure had the line item for the rehabilitation of schools. They handled the rehab of schools. And so the budget was $1 million. So just imagine, you had over 100 schools, and you had $1 million to go and to facilitate repairs of toilets, to repair roofs, to make sure that floorings that were bad, termite-infested wood was taken away, major rehab works that were needed, Madam President. So that meant that each principal was getting less than $1,000 a month to repair the schools in the country. Our government felt that it was very untenable, and all that the Labour Party had to say, even we couldn't believe what we were seeing before our eyes, because they talk about universal education. These days they talk about generational scholarships. But, Madam President, their delivery is always very low, and their talk is always big. Now, we thought that the right thing to do was to increase the amount in the school plant tenfold. And under the cabinet that I was in, I'm very happy to tell you, Madam President, that we were spending between 2016 and 2019, before COVID hit the revenues, $10 million every single year to help to build the school plants in this country. But, Madam President, as the leader of government business rightly said, that this was not enough. This was still not enough, Madam President. So could you imagine $1 million or less than $1,000 a month that the principals had to confront with? It meant that kids were going to schools and the bathrooms were bad. It meant that you needed faucets and plumbing issues in the bathrooms that exacerbated. I saw a toilet facility where they had this enamel type of material from the 1960s and 70s as the urinal, and it looked extremely bad because it was very chipped and flaky, and that was the extent. And we had a Labour Party government that was talking about universal secondary education, and that every single child had a right to be to have access to education. We believe in those principles too, but more fundamentally, what we do believe is that your talk must match your actions. And that's what we believe in the United Workers' Party. And so, Madam President, 10 million was not enough. And so I do understand and sympathize with what the government is going through. But what I don't understand, Madam President, is that the revenues of the country are better. Okay? Why would the consultancy vote in the estimates be that much larger than what you're spending on the education capital budget in the revenues of estimates and expenditure? And so, Madam President, it beats me now. The figure we're seeing for, and so they put it back to the Ministry of Infrastructure, right? So they're doing a little better than $1 million now with better economic situations than we did during COVID. Now that, I mean, they boast that the latest thing we saw, the Minister of Finance putting up the Chris report showing that St. Lucia is doing well. If St. Lucia is doing well, why are you spending only, what is that, Nancy? $3.2 million, $3,250,000 is what you're spending. And so, again, annually, that's what you have budgeted for major repairs. Under the Ministry of Infrastructure and Head 52, the Department of Education, Innovation and Vocational Training. We couldn't find a number within the Ministry of Infrastructure for school repairs. Maybe the leader of government business would like to help us to find where they're spending. But Madam President, this one-off $6 million US. I want to give the government a pat on the back because they've done a little better. But however, Madam President, their record is pitiful as it relates to the school maintenance of this country. So, Madam President, the high rhetoric and the low delivery will not fool us on this side of the opposite end. Madam President, my information tells me, and the leader of government business, in my preparation, and he has confirmed the information that I have been able to research, that a lot of roofs are still leaking. The toilets are in a state of disrepair. At the Bocash Secondary School, the last time we had this discussion, I did mention that the Tech Voc school, the Tech Voc wing at the Bocash Secondary School is still out of commission. And it means, therefore, Madam President, that the technical vacation component of that school's delivery is not able to be executed. And so, Madam President, that was a long time ago. We had this discussion since, I think, before school had reopened in September, many months, and this is still there. When I say to you, Madam President, that this government mismanages everything and they fail to organize things in an efficient and orderly manner, I give you another example. I said back in July, when they were scampering, coming to borrow money to give to contractors to go and do the school repair. And we were asking, why is it, I think it was in August we did that, why is it with just a couple weeks to go in the opening of school that you're now rushing to come to Parliament to get money, and then school will be open in a couple of weeks? And I made the point then. But then I saw on television, 2 weeks later, in the first week of school, the teachers and the leadership at the Bocash Secondary School, they are complaining about dust on the road because this government chose, they had the whole summer to construct the road along next to the school, and they wait until the school had reopened for them to go and do road works so that the dust and all of the disruptions that come with road repair will affect the students and teachers at the Bocash Secondary School in such a negative manner. And so I agreed with the teachers and the leadership that they should refuse under those circumstances. They should refuse under those circumstances to deliver the care. Again, the St. Lucia Labour Party gets little things wrong. You just cannot manage the affairs of this country very well. Madam President, they said that they would build Tech Voc schools way back in the budget. Technical vacation schools were a big thing, and they were supposed to be open. We were going to have 4 schools. They said it, one was Angers, one was Marigot, Grand River in the valley, and PI in the south. We're going to be those 4 technical vocational schools. Have you seen the Tech Voc school open? They were supposed to be in September. Up to now, Madam President, no establishment of technical vocational schools in the country. Again, big talk, low delivery. Madam President, I am amazed that the gentleman stands up and speak about first generational scholarship. Because Madam President,
beg your pardon, the gentleman?
The senator. What is wrong with gentlemen? It's a very good term.
Senator Fede, are you speaking to me?
Referring to a senator.
Are you asking me what is wrong with gentlemen? We refer in this space to senators by their names. It is Senator Gibeon Ferdinand or leader of government business.
Thank you, Madam President, for your guidance, but I think that referring to someone as a gentleman is an honorable term. I could say my learned friend, I could say the honorable member.
I repeat, we refer
Thank you,
to each other by their names. Proceed.
Yeah. So, Madam President, the senator on the other side spoke about generational scholarships, and I didn't realize that the St. Lucia Labour Party senators are so touchy that I made the most noble description of an individual that he must demand that, no problem, my friend. And so, Madam President, I am going to say that first generational scholarships is again another bluff in this regard. The last time we spoke about this, the government of St. Lucia, I made the point that there are 2,000, at least 2,000 secondary school graduates in the country. And there were just about 240 scholarships when we were in government. This government says, and she's not here, Senator Pauline Antoine, rose up and said that they had increased it to 280. And I still have that number. So out of 2,000 secondary school graduates, your effort at first generational scholars have only reached to 280, or just above 10%. You see, again, big talk, very little delivery. But the 280 scholarships, they have at least 250 of those have been happening for time in memoriam from other governments. So you have done nothing about first generational scholarships. The other thing I want to say that is very important to say is this, Madam President, is that I want to thank the government of Taiwan because they have increased the scholarship, not the St. Lucia Labour Party administration. I want to thank the government of Morocco because they have increased the scholarship. I want to thank the UK government that delivers the two-evening scholarship program, not the St. Lucia Labour Party.
That's right.
You have spent not a single cent of your money to do anything about the first generational scholarship. All the government has done is to give the program that has been existing for 40 years a name, first generational scholarship. And so the spin doctors, as they become very desperate, the spin doctors within the St. Lucia Labour Party have been busy spinning, and they have been doing little work, Madam President, because the delivery is low. So when you come with first generation, Social Economic Review shows you again that in 1997, there were 15 secondary schools in St. Lucia, right? Today there are 22, right? There are 22 today. And so the 7 was a mixture between the two parties. And so now when you want to say that you took 15 secondary schools, you add on 6 of them because now George Charles is closed. Okay, you have no money to open it. And you have overbuilt schools that you have not been looking at the population growth of the country. And today now, we have a problem in our hands of trying to consolidate infant schools and primary schools and secondary schools because the St. Lucia Labour Party administration cannot manage anything in this country. You're good at naming things. You're good at naming ceremonies.
Yes.
But you can never deliver the goods to the people of St. Lucia. And that's the point. You have failed them in education. And so this philosophy and this notion that you put forward, that you have delivered in education, that's false. Contrary to the truth. Madam President, the last census that I've seen suggests that there are 13,000 households, okay, in St. Lucia. And the government has said that they would like to see in every household by now and the next election, okay, they're going to have at least one university graduate in every household. It means that the St. Lucia Labour Party, based on their pronouncement, will have 13,000 university graduates because they're aiming to have one per household. And I want to ask them now, how many households have they empowered to have scholarships in this country? Stop fooling the people. So here we are now. First generational scholarships. This is a bluff. This is a bluff. And so, Madam President, I'm not impressed. I'm not here to fool around with the people's business. I'm not here to come and to use spin to mislead people, right? Because 13,000 households, you are going to deliver a scholarship for every household. We are now almost midway of the term, okay? You don't even have 500 scholarships. You're going to deliver 13,000? Who are you fooling? Who are you trying to fool? So, Madam President, school security is a major problem, and I know that the leader of government business mentioned school security because we see recently at a school, the Cicera Secondary School, there was an incident there recently where apparently some juveniles went into the establishment in search of other juveniles that they were in conflict with, and they were in the school, and the whole school for the day was disrupted because these other juveniles reportedly came with weapons to hunt down juveniles that they were in conflict with. And so therefore, I do embrace that point and appreciate that school security has become so much more enormously important for us to ensure that our kids and our teachers are safe at all times, and that our school plans are secured in the best manner. We've heard too many stories in this country of schools being burglarized, of security personnel in the schools that have been attacked or violently attacked by burglars. And so we must ensure that we beef up this effort, and this will require a lot of money to ensure that we could put them in the best facilities ever. Madam President, I was very happy to hear that the leader of government business spoke about smart classrooms. And these smart classrooms, this is nothing new. I remember this was a very big and passionate topic. The former Minister of Education, Honorable Gail Rigobert, was a very strong and staunch advocate for this to be done in our schools, because, Madam President, we embrace the philosophy that we must give our students the very best tools, the very best technologies, so that they, Madam President, can utilize all the technologies that are available so that they can become the best versions of themselves. So this is a very important way of unleashing the fullest potential of our students in the country, so that they can become among the greatest academics in the world. And so, Madam President, we love education on this side. That's why when the St. Lucia Labour Party administration came in, there were already 15 secondary schools built. Most primary schools and kindergarten schools were already built in the country and established. And so, Madam President, we believe that education is a liberating force. We believe that education is the hand up that most families want. We believe, Madam President, that education is the gateway to students and families' success. We believe, Madam President, that education allows families that are in the indigent and poor class to graduate into the middle class, which is why, Madam President, we found it in principle, we found it untenable for there to be $1 million, as the former St. Lucia Labour Party administration was spending, on the maintenance of our schools. We have to take away this burden of teachers having to bring buckets into the class to catch water. We have to take away the burden of fence repairs that are laying by, and teachers and principals having to worry about the safety of students within the school compound. We have to take away the burden of toilets that are in a state of disrepair, so that teachers and principals can focus on the academics of the school. So there is need, Madam President, to do overall a better job at the management of our school facilities. And so I'm very disappointed that, having collected record levels of revenue, that this administration have not seen it fit to have quantum and exponential increases in the level of monies that are spent in our school plans. And so, you know, we've heard things instead about the material, the material benefit to the teachers. Oh, that's all well and good. And we support those things as well. But also, and equally important, we need to make sure that that same teacher is not going to be distracted from the rain that is coming through the roof in the rainy season, and she has the best enabling environment to succeed for herself, her students, and her colleagues. Madam President, I want to thank you very much.
Senator Jean-Pierre Noel.
Thank you, Madam President. I almost felt like I needed to be playing go for whole here. I did not anticipate that this August House was so dissent averse. In the first motion, I got prepared to make my debut and make my contribution, and to my surprise, I didn't get that opportunity. But this is okay. I am quite happy to be here because I've always wanted to make my contribution here in this house, and I'm so glad that I'm born in St. Lucia and raised in St. Lucia, and I would not have a problem with representing my country or participating at the highest level. But this is not what this motion is about. I was very happy when I read this resolution, and you'll forgive me and grant me some latitude. This is my first time, and forgive me if I seem a little nervous and a little bit disjointed, but we carry along and you'll help me along, right? So I was very happy when we started talking about schools, because if there's one thing that really gets me, it's children, their education and how they can contribute to their country and how they can be. And you know, we say that the children are the future. So I'm always one for schools and the education. I listened to the leader of government business when he spoke about the school plant, and he spoke about amendments to the buildings to allow for students with physical disabilities. And if I'm using terms that are not politically correct, please, you will help me and correct me. So students with physical disabilities are being provided for, and I'm glad to see that, because I have been to school with children when I was a student in St. Lucia who we as students had to help them to their classrooms, and that continued for decades. Even my sisters, who were much younger than me, they too had to help, even when they left primary schools and attended secondary schools, that they had to physically lift their colleagues and get them to the classrooms. And you know, it speaks to being the brought-up-see of our children, how they're raised properly, and they help one another. So I'm glad that we see that there are going to be amendments to schools for students with physical disabilities, but I did not hear anything about students with learning disabilities. And when I say students with learning disabilities, I am not speaking of those the normal ones, or the ones that we usually come across, the ones that are housed at various institutions like the Viewfort School of Disabilities and Donata and all of those. I'm talking about those students who are unable to learn like the everyday student. And I'm very passionate about this because my husband is one of those persons who fell through the cracks, and there was no safety net for him because he learns differently, because he assimilates things differently, because he is not able to sit in a classroom and listen to a teacher drone on and on and on about things that he knows more about than the teachers. I did not hear anything about students with that kind of capability, and they lump them in students with disabilities, but they are students with different capabilities, Madam President, and I didn't hear anything about that, and that really got to me. Luckily for my husband and others like him, they did not allow their capabilities to stop them from learning, although in my case my husband dropped out of school because he just couldn't cope. He couldn't cope with the constant corporal punishment, the beatings, the being called names, being called up to the classroom to do sums on the board when they know that he's unable to. Not that he does not understand the concept, but just the fact of being in front of a classroom with the pressure, it's too much. My husband ended up being an engineer. He's an engineer today, and I'm sure everybody in this house, I know,
Madam President, on a point of order, standing order.
Senator Johari, what is your point of order?
37-1, the member is not dealing with the bill at hand, and so she needs to come back to the motion and refer to 37-1 in terms of the contents of her speech.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Jean-Pierre Noel, I have given you some latitude. I know you're speaking in the context of education, but we are speaking of a loan for infrastructure, physical plant, etc. So I am gently, are you listening to me, Senator Noel? Yes, I'm gently edging you back on track.
Thank you very much, Madam President, but I seem to have entered a door that I thought that the leader of government business entered. Maybe I should have started by asking, what is social infrastructure? I did not understand what it was, and I thought that was a door that would allow for such latitude. So I am moving on. So as I was saying, I would have loved to have heard more about that. We've heard a lot about the brick and mortar type of learning, and let's face it, there are a lot of students today that, and COVID-19 brought that to the fore for us. There are a lot of students who just cannot sit in the classroom and listen to some teachers drone on and on and on and on. And I say drone because as a student, some of my teachers were droning. I could not understand it, and I was a normal student. I understood concepts clearly. I was maybe not an A student as I should have been, or I could have been, but I was a decent student. And if it was difficult for me, I can understand how difficult it would be for those others. Madam President, I did not hear anything about innovations in schools. I heard a little bit about
Smart classroom.
We heard about the smart classrooms. But we also heard about laptops, and I did not hear anything about computer labs in schools. Because, Madam President, I will tell you something. I come from a community that is very repressed.
And I remember the very first time when the laptops were given. I was one of those who was very happy about it, not understanding the other issues that would come with those laptops. So in short order, I saw DJs with those laptops, and it was not very difficult to miss because the flag of St. Lucia was on it. There were other branding material on there, so we knew where they came from. I, on several occasions, had children come to my homes, and their parents come to my place of business and ask me, can you allow my child to do their homework using your Wi-Fi, please, because we don't have Wi-Fi at home? And I'm like, but they were given laptops. They were given laptops, but they were not given the means to use those laptops, and I still didn't hear anything about that today. We talked about climate resilience, and there are a number of other institutions that I can mention that need that kind of attention, St. Jude being one of them. But I'm very glad to have heard about climate resilience, but what exactly? I didn't understand all of it, because right now my husband and I are in the process of working with the Library Boys Primary School with regard to helping them with some project that they're doing for innovation, and the issue here is climate change and climate resilience. I didn't hear Library Boys spoken about, although the leader of government business was so proud to mention schools, and he wanted us to listen attentively to the constituencies. So I'm glad to have heard OJ in there. But I didn't hear anything with regard to innovation and technology in schools. Now, when the idea years ago came out for universal secondary school education, I want to say that I was happy, but I had my reservations, so I sat on the fence a little bit. And I wanted to see how we could make that transition. And I was disappointed, Madam President, because even today, in 2023, we still churn out functionally illiterate children. Children who have been passed through the system and went to secondary school and can only barely write their names. It's a fact. You just have to go through the school system, and even, I'm sure the Ministry of Education has the statistics to show when the children write the CPA exams, what are the grades. So we talk a lot about the buildings and upgrading the buildings, but if the students passing through the buildings are not equipped to learn within the buildings, what are we doing? What are we talking about, Madam President? I listened, I've been listening, and I've been paying careful attention, and I hear a lot of mention about what was done previously, and I'm not sure, and it's true we're talking about education, but the schoolyard mentality where we're saying tit for tat, you did that so we can do that, and you started this and so we can go on, and I would like to hear a lot more about the children contained within these schools. I didn't hear much about the food feeding program in the constituency that I'm from. I know it is a fact that oftentimes the children go to school on an empty stomach because their parents can't afford, but when they get there, there's no food because there's just a shortage of food. I didn't hear anything about that. So while we have the nice fancy buildings, if the children cannot focus because they're hungry, then what are we doing? I also heard about fencing the schools, and I'm glad to have heard a little bit about security, but it's not enough, Madam President. Fencing the schools does not only fence out the riffraff that we don't want to come in, but there are, unfortunately, students who come to school, maybe through no choice of their own, but the circumstance in which they come from, the environment in which they come from, they too are menaces, not only to the children other children, other students, but also to the teachers that come and give of their time to educate the nation's future. And I'm hearing many say that's what they are. You know, I find in St. Lucia sometimes we are a little bit too sensitive. We've become so ultra sensitive that you cannot even speak. You cannot even speak without stepping on some toes. And I understand that, you know, it's not, we don't always have to be so brash and call people names. I'm not into all of that. But if I'm using a descriptive word, an adjective, it is what it is. We understand what it is. You know? So we have students who come into school and mentally they are not prepared to learn. They're not prepared to learn. They're thinking about how I'm going to traverse this community to get to my community when I leave school without getting a cutlass lash or perhaps getting shut down. And even in schools, teachers have to be very careful. So while we are fencing in, while we are fencing out, we are also fencing in. I will remember forever, it will be indelibly printed in my mind, Dr. Morella Joseph, one of our most decorated educators, and how she got chopped at school by a student that fell through the cracks. One of my best friends, one of my oldest friends, her sister, a young teacher, got punched in the face so badly, Madam President, that she left the teaching profession. Just simply for correcting a student. And that was not where it ended, because in came the parents of the student with a greater axe to grind. So I'm happy that we're fencing, but to my mind, that security aspect is not enough. We need to do a lot more to protect our students within and without the halls of the learning institutions. We have to find ways to reach them, Madam President, reach them in ways that they can become productive members of society, and it's not just all about the brick and mortar. There is so much more. So to my mind, while I think that this is a good start, it's not enough, Madam President. It falls woefully short of what is needed for students in our country. If we say that the children are the future, then why, Madam President, are we continually churning out functionally illiterate children? Why is it that we have grouped all children in one sphere?
Senator, I have given you leeway, and I want to caution you again. The motion before us speaks to the financing of social infrastructure and other facilities damaged by Tropical Storm Brett under an education, rehabilitation, climate-linked facility. And while I appreciate your passion for psychological, emotional, etc., counseling services, etc., I appreciate it, okay? I must bring you on track on this, your maiden presentation in the House. So stay on track, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I thought I was on track because that phrase, social infrastructure, it really is, it's staring at me and it's calling my name. So maybe one on the other side will be able to explain what is social infrastructure so that...
Well, Senator, you have remained on it for quite some time. You have been going on and on for quite a few minutes, so I'm saying move on.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much. So, in closing, I would like to say that the bill is a good start, but it is not enough. The motion, sorry, is a good start, but it is not enough. It falls woefully short of where we need to be if we're going to say that we're taking care of our students and we're building them fancy classrooms and we're doing all of that, but we need to think outside the box a little bit more. Thank you.
Senator Charles.
Madam President, and members, I am very grateful to be here today again for the privilege and the opportunity given to me to serve my country and to make a contribution to the debate this morning. It's unfortunate that my principal, I was busy. I suppose I was too busy tapping my colleague that that I did not realize that the debate on the previous motion was going to be closed so early. However, I think we are debating a very important issue here this morning, Madam President. Oh, it's afternoon already. Oh, no wonder my stomach is grumbling. So, and I want to read from the resolution because I am a little bit confused in terms of the presentation by the Leader of Government Business. And the motion says that whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow an amount of $6 million from the African Export-Import Bank to finance the construction, and I think this is the part that is very critical, to finance the construction of social infrastructure and other facilities, hear this, damaged or destroyed by Tropical Storm Brett under an education rehabilitation climate-linked facility. So my understanding of this resolution is that we have created an education rehabilitation climate-linked facility in order to access financing for climate change, I suppose, resilient infrastructure project, and that is for the schools that were destroyed or damaged by Tropical Storm Brett. This is what stood out for me, and here stems my confusion, Madam President, because I took some notes on the presentation made by the Leader of Government Business, and I think he went at length to show that the government was broadening its sources for financing for the budget of the government of St. Lucia. And he went at length to say how they came to that conclusion. And I have to commend them because perhaps they are learning, Madam President, that when we ask pertinent question with reference to a previous borrowing in terms of St. Jude's Hospital and how did they come to the conclusion of borrowing $200 million, nobody could tell us, and up to a day like today, nobody can tell us how and when did they come up with that $200 million. The Leader of Government Business said that there was an assessment done on the plans of the various school facilities, and there were 16 schools that came up for immediate attention. And some of the issues were with reference to safety and to staff issues, etc. And so he went on to list a few of the schools. I noted about 7 of them that he listed. And he said entry post-secondary school, something to do with the transition of the school, etc., etc. And Grand Riviere Secondary School, termite infested. Auger Combined School, I'm not too sure what the issue was. I don't know if I wasn't paying attention, but I didn't hear what it was. Pierrot Combined School, Reunion Soisel School, Vieux-Fort Comprehensive, and Soufrière Comprehensive. And I kept waiting to hear, Madam President, the damage or the destruction that was done by Tropical Storm Brett. Yes, I kept waiting because I don't know that termite infestation is as a result of Tropical Storm Brett. I expected to hear, and so when I got this in my email, the package in my email as well, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe the hurricane brought termites.
On a point of elucidation.
Sorry. Senator Charles, a point of elucidation.
No, I'll continue. He can do that during his rebuttal.
So she doesn't want, well, I will have to stand on the point of order and say that the member is misleading the House.
Okay.
It's a point of order. Take your seat.
Yes.
What is your point of order, Senator?
Madam President, the member is misleading the House. to suggest that just because I mentioned termite-infested schools, that it means that the school in question was being repaired for termites is misleading. The termite-infested schools are more vulnerable, and therefore, in the event of these activities, these natural events, they would have had significant damage because the structure has been previously compromised. So if she wanted, that's why I stood on the point of elucidation.
Thank you.
I could have explained that to her, but she did not allow me. So I'm saying, therefore, that she's misleading the House to suggest that because I mentioned termites, that this is the reason why a school was listed. So that is misleading, and I would want to guide her accordingly.
Thank you for the explanation, Senator. Proceed.
Madam President, oh, sorry. Should I say? No, she said I could. Oh, okay. Yes. Sorry. I went to lengths, and I'm sure you would realize I went to lengths to read the motion and to link my level of confusion because, again, as I said, perhaps it is the member who is misleading the House because he spoke, the motion speaks to damage by tropical storm Brett, and I listened to the entire presentation by the member, and not once did I hear the member mention one school that was damaged as a result of tropical storm. Not one. He spoke about termites, and that's why I mentioned it, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. I think he did say there are other schools that he just mentioned a few.
Yes,
and he did just offer an explanation about the termites, so in all fairness.
Agreed, but I just wanted to clarify my point as to why I mentioned termite, because I try to pay attention in class and I take notes just in case that I will not forget. And so, again, I am hoping, Madam President, that in the rebuttal of the Leader of the Opposition, he will explain to the St. Lucian public. Perhaps he should not have gone and just mentioned the school. And again, it is something that the Labour Party does very, very well, which is what you said. They make a grand show of everything. And I listened carefully, and he said, Madam President, listen carefully to where the schools, the constituencies, the schools are, and the 7 schools that he mentioned. I made a note. Entripo is in Castries East, government school. Grand Riviere is in Dennery North, government side. Auger Combined School, Labrie, government side. Pierrot Combined School, Vieux-Fort North, government side. I was paying attention. You asked me to pay attention to the schools and the constituencies. Then he said Reunion Swazel, which is the member of the opposite, Vieux-Fort Comprehensive, government side, Soufrière Comprehensive, government side. So out of 7 schools that he mentioned, because he chose not to mention the others, he asked me to pay attention to which constituencies. One school in the constituency of a member of opposition is mentioned. One. And he asked me to pay attention. So I'm trying to figure out.
Senator Charles, what is your point exactly?
I am just saying that I was asked to pay attention to the schools and the constituencies, and I am just reporting the constituencies that they were.
Yeah, but what is ultimately your point? He did say, and I repeat, he did say he's not calling out all the schools, and he mentioned a few. So what is your point exactly?
I am just sticking to the few as well, Madam President. I'm sticking to the few. I just thought I would mention the 7 schools that he mentioned and the constituencies that they are from, which he asked to please pay attention to. I suppose he was insinuating that we are doing works in schools in the opposition constituencies as well. And I suppose that's
if that is the case, then maybe you should ask a question, but you're going round and round in identifying
Okay, well, I'm asking,
schools.
and I did say again, Madam President, I am hoping that in his rebuttal, he will clarify. Okay? But let's move on.
What are they playing for?
Let's move on. Of course, let's move on. Again, so in the presentation, the member also spoke about, and I'm trying to link the information that has been given us, or the rationale, because this is what when we stand here to speak, we expect to hear the rationale from the government side as to why we are making a particular decision. And based on that rationale that is presented to us, we will now present our argument as to whether we understand, we support, we agree, we do not agree, etc., etc. And again, he spoke about technology in the classroom, first generation scholarship, fencing and security, etc., etc. And all the while these were being talked about, my mind was on the motion that spoke to facilities damaged or destroyed by tropical storm
President,
Brett.
I must rise again, and I will rise on a point of elucidation if the member will allow me to elucidate.
Senator Charles.
He can do that in his rebuttal, Madam
And
President.
if not, Madam President,
Senator.
then I will have to rise on a point of order.
No problem.
What is your point of order, Senator?
This is misleading. Madam President, the member is insinuating that because I mentioned issues of fencing and issues of, what's the other one she just mentioned? Technology in schools, that I was suggesting that that is the reason to justify the borrowing. I made a reference to this as complementing what we're doing. That word was particularly, I was very particular. Towards the end of my presentation, I indicated to complement what we are now doing. These are measures that have been put in place to complement. So it is additional things that the government has been doing, but we are now coming to deal with the infrastructure damage from the hurricane. The word complement was very clear. And again, the member is attempting to mislead or misrepresent what I said by trying to link it with the infrastructure and the hurricane. Madam President, I repeat, this is about a motion to borrow money to repair schools that were either damaged or destroyed by the hurricane, tropical storm, but I also made reference to other things that the government has done to complement what we do. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I await perhaps further information, and again, I can only go by, it's unfortunate, but I can only go by on the information that is presented during the presentation of the member. And so I don't know what is in the mind of the member, and I don't know what additional information the member may have had and chose not to disclose during his presentation. But again, as I said, I listened and I stand corrected, but I did not hear the member mention at any point during the presentation, which is the motion, which is the resolution we're speaking about. We're speaking about borrowing money, to borrowing money for damage, to repair, I suppose, damaged or schools, facilities that were damaged or destroyed by Tropical Storm Brett. And perhaps that's why, again, I spoke to that, because I'm thinking to myself, if we're saying to the St. Lucian public, I was awaiting eagerly, Madam President, to see the schools that were damaged and hearing about the damaged roofs that were not repaired, schools that could not reopen as a result of the damage to Tropical Storm Brett. And so we're now finally going to get some money so we can repair the roof and we can reopen those schools, etc., etc. And I didn't hear none of that. And that is why when I stood up in my presentation, I said I was very confused. Because I am hoping, Madam President, that we are not in Parliament to say one thing based on this resolution. And
let me correct you. Parliament means there are two houses in Parliament.
In the Senate.
Thank you.
I'm hoping that we are not in the Senate this morning with a resolution before us that states one thing, but it is something else that will happen afterwards. Because we will come here, we will vote, and we will vote on this resolution, knowing in the back of our mind that we are borrowing money to repair schools that were damaged by Tropical Storm Brett, and maybe it's something else. And so that is why I thought it was important to raise the issue, and I'm hoping that the member in his rebuttal is going to clarify to the St. Lucian public and ensure this is what we borrowed the money for, and this is what the money is going to be used for. Because we have seen this happen time and time again. But
Senator,
moving along,
you have 15 minutes to complete your presentation.
Yes, Madam President. I hope that interruptions will be taken into consideration. Okay. But it speaks to, I think, when I look at it, and I thought, okay, we're borrowing money for schools that were damaged by Tropical Storm Brett. And as I sat home, I started thinking, well, we had a lot of damage by Tropical Storm Brett, especially by our farmers in St. Lucia. And we are borrowing $6 million, which is very important. And I did the conversion. The 6 million times 2.7, which is our rate more or less, would be $16 million EC. That we would be, yeah, 16 million. I just rounded it off. $16 million EC that we will be borrowing with reference to school rehabilitation, etc., etc. And then I thought, but it was not only the schools that got damaged, Madam President. As I go around, I recall just until a couple of weeks ago, the roof of the Viewfort Senior Primary School was completed. An entire block of the school got damaged, and I know it was not repaired in time for the reopening of school, but it has since been completed. I went to my community of Bellevue just a couple of days ago, and that roof of one block of that school was also being repaired, and I saw that it was completed. And so these were the things that were going through my mind, that I also called a few other colleagues around, and I noted that most schools that had damage to their roof, because that's what you can see. There may be other damages that we could not have seen, but there were damages to the roof, and most schools were already repaired, the roofs were back on, etc. And so I was trying to figure out, what are we borrowing the money for exactly when we say it is because of damage by Tropical Storm Brett? And then I thought about my farmers. But before I go to the farmers, I thought, I had gotten some report, Madam President, about the school feeding program in some of our primary schools. In terms of the children not having any meat, there was no meat in the schools. For at least, I can verify, in one primary school, for at least 3 weeks, there was no meat in the school. Apparently, I was told that a batch of meat had arrived. It wasn't good, it was damaged, they had to throw it away. And then when they ordered another batch, it still was not good, it had to be thrown away. And our children were going to school, and my colleague on the other side indicated, for some families, especially in the rural communities, you can find out, make a call to the Ministry of Education and find out about that. But we come from rural communities, Madam President. And one of the things you know about those rural communities, that the school feeding program is an integral part of the social fabric and the social structure of these rural communities. And that is why the United Workers' Party, in our previous campaign, we campaigned on increasing the subsidy that is being provided to those schools to ensure that more children can access. And we did that. We accomplished that within the first 100 days of being in government when we increased that. And so, Madam President, we are very pleased that we were able to do that and thing. And so I'm thinking, well, what about the school feeding program? Because it's all well and good that we have a roof and the infrastructure or the plant, which the member opposite went to lengths to explain, will be repaired, but we need to ensure, Madam President, that there is a consistent supply of food with reference to the school feeding program in St. Lucia. That is important. And I keep hearing about the pasta and the rice, but they can't give them rice anymore, and they can't give them bananas anymore. You can't give them plantain anymore, because there's none. There's none, Madam President, and that's where I'm coming from. Tropical Storm Brett did not only damage our school facilities, but it decimated the farming community. Banana and plantain for the last couple of weeks and months has been non-existent in this country. Where is the support that was done by Tropical Storm Brett that the government is saying that they're going to give to the farmers? There's none, Madam President. Okay? And I'm looking forward to that, because the Moroccan government, I am a farmer, so I'm very much aware, I'm integral into it. The Moroccan government gave free fertilizer. We stood on lines for almost 2 hours waiting, and when you get to the end of the line, I'm a small-time farmer, and there's those who are bigger than me. And I seen these big-time farmers tell me, 1 bag of fertilizer. And then when you had a report, Madam President, you had fertilizer being distributed all over people's constituency offices and other offices all over the place.
Senator. Stay on.
Yes, moving on. So, what about the school feeding program? And I'm hearing on the other side about pasta and about rice, and we want to talk about the bananas.
Senator, you do not respond to what you hear on the other side because you're taking time and you're asking me for extra time. Please stick to what you're supposed to present on. Thank you.
Yes, Madam President. I just wanted to ask a question, Madam President, in terms of Tropical Storm Brett and damage. I want to make the point again, where is the support for the farmers? Now, in conclusion, I do want to say that we on this side, we do not oppose to the borrowing of the money, but we are also very concerned, Madam President, that we are borrowing these funds at a very high interest rate, which is 6%. Madam President, this is very high, and I know this is not our traditional source of funding and financing, and we are, I think for me, it's a good thing that the government is expanding, but I think the negotiation of the government is not up to par. Because to have borrowed at 6% in these times that we are, it is unacceptable, and I think the government needs to do better in terms of their borrowing. So we are not opposed to the borrowing, but the terms and conditions, it's it's a difficult pill for us to swallow, Madam President. And considering that it is repayable in 7 years, it's most likely it's going to be a UWP government who will have to carry the brunt of that burden. We'll go very, very, very concerned about it, Madam President. And so, Madam President, let me just make sure I have all my notes there. I also noted, Madam President, and I did the conversion deliberately to look at the $16 million. I did go into the budget, the approved estimates. And it's a little concern that I have that I don't know. Perhaps I'm going to ask the question so that the member can, maybe in his rebuttal, clarify. What I have understood about the budget, Madam President, is that you're not able to spend what you have not budgeted. And I stand corrected on that. Maybe the member can clarify a bit. But if you budget $5 million for a particular program in the estimates, and that is what has been approved.
But I'm giving you very early guidance that we don't debate.
I know. I'm just asking a question.
To ask the member to clarify what's in the budget, it's something that speaks.
No. I'm just bear with me where we're going. Okay, well then it's probably a question that I am going to ask, or a concern that I have, that we are borrowing the $6 million and the conversion would be $16 million for school repairs, etc. But in the estimates, what has been approved in the estimates, I think what I can find under the estimates would be about $3.2 million. And so I'm not too sure how it is that we're able to borrow that $16 million and spend it for the school rehabilitation if that money was not budgeted / approved for in the estimates. That's the concern that I have, and that's where my mind is going. And so that's why I'm asking the question. And I certainly understand perhaps if we're not approving estimates here, maybe we can't answer, but maybe it's something for the honorable member when he goes back in his office to clarify, and clarify with the public as well. But all in all, Madam President, again, as I said, we do support the resolution. We have concerns about the interest rate. We have concerns about the fact that the resolution speaks to damage by Tropical Storm Brett, but a lot of the schools that were identified based on the presentation, they've not spoken to what damage that was done by Tropical Storm Brett. So I think the public wishes to know what damage that was done to ensure that the monies that have been borrowed in the name of this country, taxpayers like yourself and myself, we are the one repaying the money to ensure that the money is going to be used for its intended purpose. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Senator Daniel.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Let me just reorient and align myself to face you directly so that I do not make eye contact with someone on the other side who seems particularly proficient at distracting. And today I saw this gift of his being turned against members of his own side who appear to have had some difficulty concentrating because of the continuous chatter and distracting his own people that he might do even worse to me, you know. Madam President, this is the second time that I have been in this Senate serving as a temporary senator, that I have heard Senator Charles raise questions as to whether allocations are specifically supported in the annual fiscal estimates in the budget. And I don't know, maybe at some point the leader of government business, while we're not debating money bills, can clarify for us whether an allocation must be specific to a particular line item in order for it to be legal, or whether if it falls within the broad allocations made to ministries, that money can be purposed for whatever becomes the legitimate responsibility of that ministry or government department. In other words, you have a budget, let us say, for the year of $16 million for school repairs and maintenance, etc., etc. And at some point, something comes up that is not specifically mentioned. Is it that within the ministry they cannot allocate it or purpose it for that because it is not specifically mentioned? If not, a budget would have to be particularly prophetic. It would have to be particularly clairvoyant to foresee every single thing that would arise. If a hurricane or a tropical storm comes, that we only see it in the context of a roof being blown off, but we don't see it in the context of maybe the school feeding program is affected because the electricity supply was affected, and so your refrigeration facilities, you know, is affected. That we don't see it in the context that, okay, your wall was not knocked down, but something pertaining to your after-school holding of students in a place where they can stay. School finishes at 2:30. Parents don't get off work until 4:30. So between that time, do you have a facility where you can keep the students there safely until their parents? I'm not saying this is it. There seems to be a difficulty in understanding social infrastructure. That when you have things like social infrastructure, they may involve home caregivers program, something else that does not have to do with the strict blocks and walls and concrete and steel, but have to do with the support systems of transportation, and as Senator Charles herself mentioned, the school feeding program. You know, it is a social infrastructure attached to the education system. So I was a little, you know, miffed as to what seems to be missed, and I had to ask myself, is it that I do not understand those things myself? So when people raise them, they seem a little weird to me, you know, but to me it appeared to be something that was a no-brainer, but I ain't so bright, you know, I gotta admit that to you. Senator Fede seems to be, I might say, stricken, afflicted may be too strong a word, but it seems to be stricken with the same perception of the leader of the opposition in the lower house and his political leader of the United Workers' Party, with the notion that if ever you have to claim success for something to be considered to be fiscally successful, that the manner in which you represent that success is by pointing not to the results that you have obtained, but to the amount of money that you have spent. And so over the years we've become accustomed, even at a time when he was not yet an elected member, he was a senator. Significantly, he began his foray in the parliament as a senator, Minister of Tourism and Civil Aviation at the time, that his boast was always the amount of millions that he and his ministry spent, whether to subsidize planes, American Airlines, to fly into St. Lucia empty or half empty, whatever it is. This was always the boast, that we spent $10 million. And so this is not the first time I have been here and I am hearing the criticism of this present government for not spending enough money. We spent 10 million, y'all are only spending 2 million, so y'all are a failure, y'all are not doing. Is that the metric of success?
Madam President, I must stand on a point of order. I'm very sorry to interrupt the honourable member's presentation.
What is your point of order, Senator Fede?
The member is grossly misleading the House as it relates to the results component. To suggest that we have a focus and emphasis on money only, that's not true. because in those years that you're talking about, we see a fundamental increase in the airlift, and we saw tourism arrivals. Check the figures, and the figures produce the results. So that's a wrong premise. Yes, Madam President.
You indicated that the member is misleading the House based on his understanding of what you uttered. Your responsibility is to bring out the truth if he misrepresented your utterances.
And that's what I'm doing.
No, you went off on a tangent about figures.
No tangent. But simply, I'm giving him the results.
Simply.
And you need figures to quantify results.
Senator Fady, you simply indicate to the Senate what you said that he represented succinctly. Just simply.
Madam President,
thank you.
What I am saying to the Senate is that the member said very clearly and confidently that I am afflicted by the same disease, or whatever you want to call it, or the same issue that the leader of the opposition in the lower house is afflicted by. And that is, we only talk about spending of monies, okay? And we don't look at the results. And I'm saying to him that he's wrong about the corresponding results, because whether in tourism, whether about the building of the school plans, we have seen corresponding results at every time. And so that statement is an absolute untruth.
Madam President, it appears that my attempt to reorient my alignment to look at you in order to avoid distraction has been an exercise in futility. The honorable member is determined to distract members of this side when we are speaking, and it is not the first time I have observed that he rises on what he calls a point of order, but he cannot point to any violation of the orders, aka the standing orders. He cannot point to any one infraction, and I'm hoping as we grow and as we move along, even though I'm not a regular here, that Senator Fady will come to the point of understanding a point of disagreement. What is a disagreement that he has with an opinion expressed by someone as opposed to a point of order? You cannot control people's opinions and the manner in which they express themselves in this highest forum of debate and discussion when an allegation is continuously being made, an untrue one, that freedom of expression is under attack in this country. If we are to come and make that allegation, we must extol the virtue of such freedom of expression in this august and highest forum as an example and a display to the country. I say that as an aside, and I will move on. I will repeat the point that the gross expenditure of money is no true reflection of the success of your fiscal policy. That is the point that I am making. You may have spent 10 million and it may have been a justified 10 million. But because you have spent that 10 million, you have laid the groundwork, you have put in the concrete and steel, it means your successor may not need to go down that road. Too often we believe that every government must prove its value and its success by building roads, by building community centers, when what we need is to say, okay, the roads have already been built, the community centers have already been built, the hard infrastructure is already there. What we need now is to focus on the maintenance, on the provisioning, on the equipping, on the putting in of the computers, on the putting in of ancillary facilities. We need to stop making that point that I spent 50 million, therefore I have done more than you have done. That is the point that I am making. Too much of this. And you know, sometimes when we look at how the money is spent, a lot of it is dubious. It's not everybody who will come in and he'll do a fresh start. Why do a fresh start when you have already put down the things in place? But we see everything in the context of doing a fresh start and starting things all over again. The endless reinventing of the wheel just to claim a legacy that I spend this and I splurge this and so on. I'm saying that is flawed reasoning, and it is one that we must seriously look at and push back against it by way of rebuttal, as I think I am doing. I will not be long, Madam President, and I'm sure before I finish, the leader of opposition business will rise again to say that I'm misleading or I'm misquoting him. Senator Fede seems to have confused the matter of the university graduates and the policy of this government to say we want to achieve the feat of having one university graduate per household. He mentions that we have about 13,000 whatever number, and please don't, come up on point of order, because 13,000 something households in St. Lucia. So that means we should be giving out 13,000, if it's 13,500, he said 13,500 scholarships. Again, it is the fallacy and the flaw in the reasoning. The fact that we have 13,500 households does not mean that we need to achieve the one graduate per household figure, that we need to achieve one, because there would be several of those households that already have university graduates. Sometimes they have more than one. So are you now going to go and say that you need to give out the amount of scholarships to achieve one graduate per household? What you are saying is that those households that do not yet have a university graduate, you want them to have at least one. It does not mean that you can put on hold the other households that already have one or more university graduate. That would be discriminatory. If someone qualifies for a scholarship, if someone has a household, has the qualifications and the need and the promise to get more university graduates per household, you're not going to put them on hold. There will be those who already have their first degree. There is a chance for them to get their masters. There is a chance for them to get their higher degrees. What you are saying is that those households that do not yet have a university graduate, you want them to have one, and you're not limiting them to one. You say you want them to have at least one. But if there are people who come up who are eligible for scholarships and to go to do degrees, 5 in a household for the first time, and you can afford to give it, you give it to them. Scholarships are not the only way to facilitate people in getting university degrees. There are economic cost support and other things that you can give them and so on to encourage them. The other fallacy that I found is that somehow the government has failed because it is not the one that is giving out the total number of scholarships needed. So you have only given away 200 scholarships, the same number that was there. What if now we don't need the government to be footing the bill for more scholarships because we have more support from the government of Turkey, we have more from the government of Morocco, we have from Venezuela, we have from Cuba, we have from the UK on the Chevening, and so many other, we have so many other scholarships. So it is possible now that the government does not need to shell out so much for scholarships because it has expanded its range of international cooperation, diplomatic engagements from Taiwan, and so many others that we can do without having to shell out. Who will turn down the opportunity to save? Who will turn down the opportunity to economize? Who will turn down the opportunity, to spare the treasury of St. Lucia some more burden at a time when we have so many things, fiscally and otherwise, militating against us? Now, I heard Senator Charles straining, it seems, at a bridge way too far to suggest that in the repairs and in the attention being given to schools, she didn't use the word. Please don't challenge me. She didn't say discrimination or victimization. She didn't say that. But when she spoke about out of 7 schools, only one of them falls in an opposition represented constituency. I mean, I didn't know whether to laugh. I didn't know whether to giggle. I didn't know whether to raise my eyebrow. I didn't know what to do on this one. There are 17 constituencies. Only 2 of them are represented by opposition members of parliament. The ratio will invariably mean that when you count 1 out of 7, let us multiply that ratio by 2. If you multiply 1 out of 7 and say you take 2 opposition, what does that mean? 14 government-held ones. You still have 3 others that will get attention without any opposition there to match them. Does that mean you're being discriminatory? The numbers are the numbers, the numbers are the numbers. The numbers are the numbers. We have a problem with how the elections turned out. And had we done it, the people spoke. And they spoke. When they spoke 11-6, Where was that concern when the kind of discrimination and marginalization and naked victimization under something like the constituency development program? Not a dime given to 6 people who the people in their wisdom spoke and decided that they wanted in the House of Assembly. You know, this was discrimination. The government changed. The new government, this government has done absolutely nothing so petty and despicable and victimizing. They have made sure that every member of the parliament gets their allocation, including the opposition representatives. And nobody fault, you know, the people spoke that is only 2 of them. And nobody fault that 1 out of 7, 2 out of 14 still leaves a surplus of 3 on the government side. I will not even waste time commenting, Madam President, on this continuous effort to paint St. Lucia as if it is in the worst possible condition anyone of. Because I had the contradictions. At the same time you come in and talk about poverty in St. Lucia and things are so bad and so on. It's the same time I'm hearing that people, I'm sorry I have to refer to something, but we're in the same sitting of course. The same thing I'm hearing about how people, you know, living on food stamps in that country and people demonstrating because of inflation and this and that and the other. But I will stop here, Madam President, since I recognize that this is a skill which I must acknowledge that the opposition has. That on any motion that we have, no matter what the specifics of it, to go all over and to bring in everything. So we're talking about something pertaining to schools and education and social infrastructure associated with education. We somehow end up with the farmers. We somehow end up with that. We somehow end up with there being no plantain. I don't know where they get in the plantain at some restaurants right here in town, not far, that I go and they give me my ripe plantain because I tell them I don't like the green plantain, it's too hard. They give me banana, I tell them I ate enough banana already, give me some more sweet potato and dash in. You know, I don't know where they're getting it. All over the place. I don't know if that is the story that the marketing board will tell us that we are being told. There is none whatsoever in the country. But I recognize again, I have to pay respect to those who have the skill to take every issue and every subject, no matter how precisely and explicitly stated on the order paper, to use it to bring in some preconceived political talking points and to repeat them over. And I'm surprised that they haven't heard about 2.5%, you know. I'm really, really surprised that I haven't heard about the 2.5%, how it's killing the country and the country is dead because of it. But thankfully for that, I will leave it at that and to say that I stand in support of this resolution. Madam President, thank you very much.
Senator Shalry.
Madam President, thank you for acknowledging my need to just make a short intervention on the motion before us. A motion to borrow $6 million from the African Export-Import Bank to finance the construction of social infrastructure and other facilities damaged or destroyed by Tropical Storm Brett under an education rehabilitation climate-linked facility. And so I want to start off, Madam President, by stating categorically my support for the motion before us. And of course, not just specifically in terms of the motion, but the thrust of the government of the day to make some timely interventions as it relates to education in this country. I would assume, Madam President, that an intervention as it relates to education, as it relates to intervention in the education sector, would obviously be something that is welcoming by right-thinking men and women of this country, understanding the importance of education in any particular country, and of course St. Lucia is no exception to that. Of course, I sometimes wonder why I keep being surprised sometimes by the things I hear uttered in corridors that, in my opinion, should be corridors of intelligent thought, intelligent conversation, and intelligent discourse. And I always, and I will always continue to say that whereas we may think that there are people not listening to us, there are people in this country who listen, sometimes with bated breath, to hear the quality of discourse that comes from certain institutions, certain corridors, certain places where they expect that they will leave perhaps with a better understanding of what the issues are, a better understanding of how we arrive at solutions to the problems that confront us as a small country, but sometimes I come out short. And I am trying very much to learn, and it's something I share with my friends all the time, that a lot of the times our disappointments come from the expectations that we have up front, but that is not me saying that we should not continue to have expectations, Madam President. And so I just want to focus on a few things. Again, to say that I support the level of infrastructure development, the level of repairs and so on that will be undertaken in our school plans. And of course, the conversation about damaged school plans and inadequate resources allocated to schools, it's an age-old argument that I do not think we will ever get to the point where we do away with it. But here is the funny thing, Madam President, is that it is not isolated to just that. As we go on a regular basis, and those of us who manage households, I don't know if all of us here manage households, but those of us who manage households, I think that there is a clear understanding that at any point in time, no matter what allocation you set aside for particular things, there are particular events that will happen, whether it is internal, whether it is external, things that will happen that will inevitably affect the way you are able to manage that prior allocation. And so I have heard so many times the age-old argument of it was $1 million that was allocated, measly amount allocated to the repair of schools. The question is, when will what amount be enough to allocate to whether it is schools, to allocate to whether it is healthcare? When will it ever be enough? When from very, very young you learn that these dynamics are forever changing, and so cost and cost implications and changes in costs and so on, that this is a moving target. And so of course we understand that if in one particular year 1 million was allocated, we do the assessment and we evaluate that it was woefully inadequate. It is incumbent on the government of the day, whichever forms the next government, to now come back, review, reevaluate and decide it was not adequate. Let us add more, let us reallocate, let us re-engineer, let us use what we have smarter. And I think I agree with Senator Daniel when he indicated that sometimes we look at the price tag, we look at the millions and the zeros, and we say, well, it is inadequate. But is it really the answer to the questions? Can we look at the same 1 million, reallocate it, use it smarter rather than add more to it? Madam President. And as a parent, it is something that I am challenged to do on a regular basis in my household. But I have to let my 15-year-old son understand that I may not always be able to add a 20 US or a 30 US to the cost of your shoe next year. But perhaps you need to look at the way in which you use the resources that you have. And how could you now ensure that it is used in a manner where you're more fiscally responsible, in a manner where you're able to manage it better so that it can last longer, rather than we constantly dishing out more money to fix things. Where do you end when you do that, Madam President? And I think that as we discussed, like I said before, that we need to be able to evoke that level of consciousness within our people, that the answer to the answers to the problems is not always adding more zeros and more money, but in about really thinking about how we re-engineer and repurpose and re-strategize what we have available. And it is no wonder that we have some of the social ills that we have, because what we teach our people is, instead of being at a position where you perhaps satisfied with what you have and manage it differently, we constantly push them to get more, and sometimes get more means to steal from the other person. Sometimes get more means to take from the other person, and that is not always the answer to that. And Madam President, I just want to take perhaps a little trip down memory lane. And I agree the infrastructure is important. And I think I sort of heard the juxtapositioning from the other side. In one breath we talk about the plants and so on. And then in the next verse, thankfully, we're able to catch ourselves and say that it is more than just the plant. I live in the community of Vigier, and I attended the Deriso Combined School. If anybody knows this area very, very well, on a daily basis, I walked up a hill and crossed a river. And for years, Madam President, there was not even a bridge across that river. As a child going to Deriso Combined School, I jumped stones. I jumped on stones when this bridge was down. Again, history speaks for itself. The constituency that I live in has always been a constituency who has voted the St. Lucia Labour Party, and maybe that answers some of the questions. But I jumped stones. I remember the principal, teacher Sheila, on many an occasion, especially during the heavy rains, would pass around if a circular and call the children from Vigier children, because it's about to rain or it's raining. We have to leave home early and leave the school early and go home before the river overflows its banks. And I'm pretty sure the leader of government business can attest to the fact that there were times we crossed in rivers that were gushing down. That's how I went to school. But did that prevent me from learning? Did that prevent me from learning? In fact, Madam President, what it did is that it taught me, and it is something that I've passed on to my children, that in times of adversity, you put your back to the wheel and you do what you must to ensure that does not happen. And so I am very, very grateful that now my 9-year-old daughter, I could stay at my mother's house and see the top of the school at Vigier Primary, thanks to a St. Lucia Labour Party government. That when I leave home at 7 o'clock in the morning, I know that my daughter does not have to jump stones. And these are the strides that we've made when it comes to school. But again, to make the point, Madam President, that the physical conditions that I was in at the time, and many of us at Vigier either walked to Deriso or walked to Piero Combined School to go to school, it did not prevent many of us from learning, because we understood that we were in a place. Unfortunately, we didn't put ourselves there, but we needed to move, we needed to do better, we needed to grow. And so, whereas a lot of children walk to Mikud Secondary School, for example, down the Canal Road to go to school, many of them can now enjoy boarding a bus and going to the secondary schools. And so, again, to say that sometimes the physical conditions that we focus so greatly on, yes, it is important, but it's not the know-it-all in terms of education and being able to deliver quality education in this school. And we have to teach our children these things. I had a lot of other things touted around the room. And again, the whole issue of scholarships, Madam President, and maybe today it's a bit of nostalgic for me. I was also a scholarship child. I received a scholarship from the National Community Foundation when I entered secondary school. And there are times when I sit and I wonder, where would I have been today if perhaps I was not part of that cohort of students who were given the opportunity to get a scholarship to attend a secondary school. Fortunately, some of us sit around here and we can easily fund, whether it is through the silting of rivers, whether it is through genuine work, whether it is through our government salaries at the end of the month, whatever the case may be, we can send our children to school comfortably. But the reality is a lot of people in this country for years have not been able to do that. And so when you hear people trivialize scholarships and so on, of course we understand that we are in a space where we will not be able to afford to give every child a scholarship. But when you speak about provision of scholarships in that manner, the children who actually it mattered to them, people like me, who was able to go to school on a full scholarship. And I remember leaving secondary school, being in Form 5, and all my classmates were in the principal's office and in the bursar's office, filling in application forms for tertiary education. And I couldn't. An A student at Beaufort Comprehensive Secondary School, I couldn't, because I knew for a fact that my parents just could not afford. And yes, I told the white lies then to my classmates, I'm not ready to go back to school. I'll work for a little while. Blatant lie. I could not go. I was ashamed to say that I could not go. Thankfully, I remember getting that call when many of my other classmates had actually started orientation for school, and the NCF indicated to me that I'd gotten an extension for 2 more years to go to a tertiary level education. It was at that point I remember calling the A-level department and saying that I want to apply. Thankfully, my CXC grades allowed me almost free entry into the school, and I'm grateful for that. And so when you speak about scholarships in that manner, it doesn't matter if it's the one, because there were 2 of us who got extended that period. But the 2 of us, it means got an opportunity to now be citizens of this country who can now contribute to to discourse, contribute to ensuring that other people. And so I have made it my life's journey not to be able to just sit down comfortably and say, well, my children can go to school. On a regular yearly basis, I ensure that it doesn't matter how much dry bread I have to eat. I heard one of the members on the other side talk about the banana and the whatever. And I love bananas. I eat bananas. And sometimes it is the answer to me being able to provide a notebook and a pencil to another child, because I'm grateful of the opportunity that I was given. And so we need not trivialize these things. Whether it's 1 or 2 who's able to get a scholarship, we have to applaud these efforts, because these are the children who will inevitably carry us through in terms of this country. Madam President, I saw an attempt to listen and learn. But I know the concept of learning can be a very, very broad concept, because listening and learning is about hearing, but about also being able to analyze and decipher what was heard. And then there has been a constant trajectory to water down particular things and introduce things that may not even necessarily be in keeping with anything that is on the table. And so we had a long, drawn-out discussion about how many schools fall in the opposition parliamentarian, the opposition constituencies, and so on. And of course, we have to perhaps, just for a little while, and I don't want to spend much time on it, understand where that comes from. This comes from a place where, in the previous administration, it was not just he say or she say. It was a culmination of activities, a culmination of behaviors that affected persons in constituencies like where I live in Vieux-Fort North, where it was not just a case of where things were not being done, After we felt so blatant about it, we defined a term for it to define what it meant that 6 constituencies would not, the constituents of these constituencies would not enjoy the same benefits of government resources with the other 11. That is the reality of what existed. And so I do not find it strange now that perhaps we want to take the position of justifying that we're doing things in opposition constituencies now, because the cry of the people were on the ground. You cannot forget these things. I cannot forget, Madam President, sitting in a constituency where a road was being done from one part of the constituency to the next. More than 50% of the road was completed under the SLP administration. And then when the UWP administration came in, they forgot about the rest of the road. The senator on the other side, Senator Charles, she mentioned her constituency when she went to Bellevue. But back in the day, it meant that she drove that very road to go to Bellevue, from Grace to go to Bellevue, in a road that the government she sat on would have refused to complete the road because they would make us suffer. That's what it was. They would make us suffer for it. And in communities, even her specific community, I remember areas like Back Street in Grace, where the contracts were already signed for these community roads to be done. And then these contracts were taken away from the people. Madam President, that's the reality of what exists. And so maybe now we want to walk the floor and talk about that. We are doing exactly what we spoke about that they didn't do. Ensure that the resources of the country, whether it is for school repair, whether it is for any other thing, it is adequately spent and adequately accounted for across the length and breadth of St. Lucia. Because the children who sit in these school plans, the children who are expected to learn within these walls, they come from every nook and cranny of St. Lucia. And if not for anything else but for the children of St. Lucia, we need to ensure that when we are expending government resources, that we do not leave people out. And I think as well that Senator Daniel touched on something that I wanted to point out, that came out in the discussion, in terms of unforeseen circumstances. And again, I get to this point where I started, that there is an expectation that the discourse that happens at levels such as these within the country must seek to inform our people, especially our young people who are looking up to us, to understand particular concepts. That you budget for something, for example, you get up in the morning and you had no intention to go to the doctor, but you broke a fall this morning after you got out of your bed. Do you say, well, mate budget poorly we doctor, so you're just going to let yourself bleed out? Or do you now determine where do you now get the monies, where do you now take the resources to be able to seek medical attention? And it may be at the expense of something else, but it's required at the time and unforeseen circumstances. And so we have to be careful what we dish out there. Madam President, I do look forward to these infrastructural works being undertaken at the schools. Again, to say that it will be a constant thing, that things will change, different ideas will emerge on a global scale sometimes as well, that will help us see that perhaps what we feel is adequate in terms of school and curriculums and infrastructure for schools are not adequate, and so we need to add on and we need to improve. And it will be something that will always need to happen, and it is the responsibility of the government of the day to ensure that this is done. All the other advice that was given in terms of all the other add-ons, because we understand that the school plan cannot exist on its own, I think these things are adequate. But I challenge, Madam President, and it is perhaps something I've thrown out to Senator Charles before, that whilst we, and I know it was said maybe about last week or so, that issue was raised on a platform in terms of some of the schools that did not have adequate food and the food was spoiled and so on. What are we as concerned citizens doing about these situations that present themselves in our communities? What are we doing about them? And I said before that I have made it almost my life's journey to ensure that, especially when it comes to education, if there is an issue and the principal at the Vigier Primary School calls me, I make myself available, and I can say that I will do it long after my child has left the corridor of that school, because I understand the change in the physical landscape and the psychological landscape that school has had on the community. And so when I can, where I can, I chip in. I don't mind pushing my hand in my pocket if there is no chicken in the school and say, well, this is what I can put on the table. At what point do we as leaders now try to now spread this type of community engagement amongst our people, rather than sit down and lament the fact that government whatever, whilst we sit comfortable in our homes, and we feel comfortable that our children are fed, but we know the ills that exist, we know the children that are going without. What are we doing about it? What are we doing about it? And I think that this is a constant thing in terms of the opposition. And just quickly, not to dwell on it, the issue of the little houses that were built for people and so on. And so I've thought about it and I've tried to figure out.
Senator, I think I've given you some latitude. I think you should stick to it. Thank you, Madam President. But Madam President, to make the point that, one, like I indicated, that I support the motion before us, but two, that we should and we can do more in terms of we as leaders in this country, rather than dwelling on the little things that we feel needs to be fixed and needs to be fixed now. We have to ask ourselves the bigger question in terms of what we can do to complement what the government is doing and to give due
due praise where the praise is due, to ensure that these wheels of motion continue to move for the benefit of the people in our country, Madam President. Thank you.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the colleague senators who made their contributions on this motion, particularly Senator Jean-Pierre Noel, who made her debut. It was sad that she had to be interrupted a couple of times, but we know it's her first, and I'm hoping that as she continues, maybe during the course of the day, she'll pick up, because I thought her leader of opposition business just left her out in the cold. Didn't guide her along in terms of how to approach. But we thank everyone who has contributed for their contribution, and I think it is very important that in the Senate we continue to keep the level of the conversation at a phase or in a way that informs and is constructive and mature. Madam President, just by way of observation during the contributions, there are a few little things that came up that I want to just make quick brief mention of. First of all, the opposition in their response clearly had an intention to suggest that there were some figures that they would have compared about who spent how much and who spent more and who spent less. In fact, there was an analogy that was made which I need to clarify, that because you had 13,000 or whatever number and you divide it and do the basic math, a principal would have received an average of $1,000 per school. Madam President, it's clear, and I think I can forgive the leader of opposition business. When something is not your forte, you stay away from it. If you don't know what you say, just leave it alone. To try to analyze school allocation, the truth is there's a formula that has been used for school allocation by all governments. Primary and secondary schools get different allocations for maintenance. And the way it's done has nothing to do with what was being suggested, that about 1,000 per school. And so the issue is not how much money is borrowed, because it is true that the opposition has made claims that they can borrow more. They have always won that argument, and I don't want to win it. It's okay if you can boast that you have borrowed more and you can borrow more. No, for me, as a government, we will not shout and say we have borrowed and can borrow more than you. I don't think that's a cap the Labour Party wants to wear, or the government of the Labour Party wants to wear. What's important, Madam President, is not how much you can borrow, but how you can impact the school or the reason or the project that you are borrowing for. So what this opposition could not do with the $10 million that they boast about, we were doing with this wasn't a million, $900,000. Less than 1/10 of what they were boasting about borrowing. This Labour Party government was able to do more with the $900,000 that we had. So the argument is not about how much you can borrow and how much you can allocate. It's what you did with it. Madam President, there was an attempt to raise an argument because I asked the opposition to pay attention and they did not. It's their habit. It looks like our two temporary senators have caught the habit of their leader not paying attention to the issue being debated. And he correctly was more distracting than helping them understand that if you want to respond to an argument, listen to the argument. And don't pick up little things, and I have to stand on a point of order and remind you of what I said. Madam President, as you can see, the opposition leaders' seat is empty. This is the usual. So when you're not paying attention, and your colleagues are not paying attention, and then to suggest that I was using the 7 examples, I made a very clear explanation. I gave a very clear explanation that there was an assessment done up front. The assessment was not done by the politicians of the St. Lucia Labour Party. The assessment was done by the technocrats of the Ministry of Planning and the Ministry of Education. There's a plant and equipment unit. They did this. They did the assessment. These are professionals, St. Lucian public servants who go about doing their work. So if the report of the assessment revealed that 16 schools should be given priority because of the extent of the damage, or because they were termite infested, and because of that they were more compromised. That is the basis for the decision that we have made to give these 16 schools priority. Madam President, if these 16 schools happen to be in constituency X, Y, or Z, the government that I serve in will not remove any of the schools. And so to say that I gave 7 examples, of course I gave 7 examples. I could have given 16. And I think one of the senators asked, what about constituency X? I could have mentioned the Blanchard Combined School and the Angers Secondary School in Micoud South, which is an opposition constituency. That is where I live. I could have done that. I mentioned 7 examples, and I set the basis for why I chose to mention 7 examples. So, Madam President, when the opposition selectively chooses to respond to part of what I said, and makes an issue of location of schools and asking the question, where are these schools located? Is it suggesting to us that the assessment that was done by the professionals in our public service is being questioned? Are they saying to us that the assessment that the public servants did was done or were done on a political basis? We were not the ones who decided that reunion needed attention. That's what the assessment revealed. We did not decide that Bocage or whichever school in whatever constituency had to be prioritized. That was what the assessment did, which is why I started my presentation by establishing that the assessment was made. But you know what? They didn't pay attention. And so in their haste to play the politics in the Senate, they forgot to pay attention to the facts that I put forward. But that's okay. Madam President, another argument that was raised is one that I'm very familiar with, because I happen to have been in the teaching service for many years. And I recall the leader of opposition business making reference to the timing of that decision. And schools not, the Boca school, I think he said, was disrupted because they were doing work late. Madam President, it was in the news, it was very clear in the news, on the first day of school a few years ago, when the Minister for Education then was the parliamentary representative for Micoud North, and the Minister for Education, her constituency, the school where I was principal that the Senator Charles knows very well, the Micoud Secondary School, on the first day of school, there was no class could have been held.
Remind them.
There was no class. The teachers and the principal put their tools down because the school was not ready. And then the minister had to come on TV and say she's going to scrape up some money to fix the schools. School was open. At least the Boca school, there was school. And there was disruptions that were taking place outside the school. This is a situation where the MP, who was the Minister for Education, could not have had a school in the only secondary school in a constituency to actually start school. So my point, Madam President, is not to go back and rehash everything the opposition did not do. The opposition needs to be careful when they point fingers at people, because your situation is 10 times worse. What is it about your nose? That is not an argument that you can stand on. Madam President, an argument was raised trying to divert the attention away from the motion about the number of schools that were built by whom. Just as a reminder, between 1997 and 2001, and then 2001 to 2006, this government of the St. Lucia Labour Party built 6 secondary schools in this country. That's a fact. And if you have to do the ratio, the ratio would be a little more than 1.5 per year. So, a little less than 1.5 per year. So, Madam President, the point is, at the time, there was a need because of the population census and again, data-driven decision-making, that there was a need to construct more schools. In Marigot, in PI, in Grosile, in Angers, there was a need to construct more schools. And at that time, Angers was in a constituency in opposition. And the school was built there. And that was not decided based on who voted for who. That was based on the statistical analysis in the country that was informed by data. Madam President, if in 2023 the circumstances have changed, there is clearly an issue with the population of this country, there is clearly an issue with the birth rate, there's clearly an issue with the mode of instruction, how you can educate people. If there is less need for expanding the physical plants in the country, that we can repurpose those schools, then what is wrong with that? What is wrong with that? You have to adapt to the reality of the day. So we're talking about repairing schools, but they want to bring an argument about how many schools you built. Madam President, smart classrooms, I mentioned it in the presentation. And I did not suggest again that the borrowing of the money to repair schools that were damaged was to build smart classrooms. I said, and I'll repeat now that I am on my feet, that in addition to the borrowing for the physical infrastructure and the repairs, it is complementing what we were doing and what we continue to do in the instructional part aspect of our schools. And the instructional aspect, for the benefit of Senator Japierre, deals with one of the issues you raised about students with specific learning difficulties. I don't want to get into a technical argument on education. That's my field. There are students who will come to school with learning difficulties. There are reasons for that, and that is why you have these interventions. It is done through the instructional process, and I mentioned that. I did not highlight any particular disability, although I mentioned the special needs because some of the damage was done to the special needs school. But I was just making the point that in addition to the infrastructural repair, it is complementing other things that we were doing. For example, the laptop program, for example, the smart classrooms. That is what essentially the argument was. And I don't think I am so poor at explaining, because I've been in the Senate for a while now, and the opposition, they are familiar with, what we are doing, that it was so bad that the opposition did not understand what I was trying to say. And even when I tried to clarify, my colleague senator didn't want to give me a chance to elucidate. So I had to let her know that she was misleading the House, and then explain. But again, we will learn. We all will learn. Madam President, very interestingly, the leader of opposition business was able to take this debate again away from the essence of this conversation and try to talk about the economy, how bad the economy was, and he did it in the previous argument. But while he was trying to establish that, why is it only 6 million? You could do more. You're not doing enough. Because, and here's what he says to justify that. Here's what he says. We are realizing record levels of revenue in this country. The leader of opposition business, as he comes back, I welcome him back. So I'll repeat that for his benefit. Kind sir. The leader of opposition business, I am responding to your comments, Honorable Senator. Thank you, Madam. Madam Chair, I am responding to the comments made by the leader of opposition business. The leader of opposition business stood on his feet after saying everything about our tourism figures, how woefully the industry is doing, and the numbers are so poor. But he's saying in the subsequent argument that we are recording record levels of revenue. And so because you're recording all that revenue, why aren't you doing more? Why are you only coming to borrow that, to do that? Because we need more in the schools. So here's my argument, Madam President. If we are recording record levels of revenue in this country, and the industry that is primarily responsible for the revenue that we collect is tourism, then how are we collecting that record revenue levels if tourism is doing so bad? What is the logic in this argument? It is the number one contributor to our foreign exchange and our collection of revenue.
Would you allow me to elucidate your question? Yeah. So the member asked that if tourism is doing so badly, why is the revenue doing so exceptionally well? for the mere fact that we're going through an inflation problem, the prices has been inflated. 10% of $5 is always going to be less than 10% of an item, the same item that are coming through the customs, and you have to pay $7.
Madam President, may I continue?
Without the intervention of the presiding officer, I noted the two senators did their own. I may ask you to continue.
I apologize. Again, may I now continue? You see, I must never take my cue from the opposition. I must always pay attention to the chair. So, Madam President, I just heard something there that I don't think I want to respond to it. It was just, what kind of economics was that?
It's an economic fact.
Anyway, so Madam President, tourism is doing so bad. Hits on tourism. Tourism is bad. Record figures are bad. But the economy is record revenue. And now it's not because of tourism we're collecting the revenue. So Madam President, I want to wrap up because I don't want this to become comical. This is almost becoming comical. I have heard before, and I am a very strong defender of schools and students and matters relating to education. Very, very strong defender of that because that's my passion, that's my job, that's what I did. And I'm still an educator. When anybody suggests in trying to derail the argument about laptops, that argument was raised by our debut senator, Senator Noel, correct? Yes. Senator Jean-Pierre Noel. That when the laptops were given, students, she saw young people doing DJ with the laptop. Madam President, I want to ask, what was really wrong with that? What is wrong with a young person armed with a laptop, a device that they can use to be able to learn how to do virtual DJ? What is it? That's what they call it? And you can develop something you can develop a career in. The creative industries is crying out for our young people to explore their potential. A device where you can develop an app. We have these days, you know how much people pay for those things? You have a device that gives you the ability, yes, to be able to develop your creativity, programming. I mean, how can somebody come to hit on a tool that a young person can do so much with? I don't know why the opposition still wants to go back to that argument. There is no way you can win the argument about laptops. It is just not going to happen. And computer labs in schools. Well, if a laptop is so bad, and one child can have one for himself to access the internet and to be able to do all these things, then what about a computer lab that is a stationary, something that is located within a space, and once you leave that space you can't access it? Where's the logic in this? And by the way, Madam President, we have continued to refurbish and improve our computer labs in schools. We are not saying that the laptop means that you don't need the computer labs. While we do so, and we ensure that Wi-Fi access, by the way, we are ensuring that households are now receiving the $20 plan. Over 5,000 households in this country accessing Wi-Fi so that these laptops can be useful, even more useful to these children. Why is it so wrong for a child to have a device that they can use to do their SBAs at home, that they can empower them to be able to develop certain creative functions? People now can sit at home and make a living with a laptop. You don't have to go to work. During COVID, you saw how it was exposed. The permanent secretary of education, and I don't blame her, she was just the messenger, had to come on TV and make an appeal for parents to use laptops to children. Laptops. If the permanent secretary, the top technocrat in the Ministry of Education, and at the time she was serving in the government of the United Workers' Party, can come on national television and make an appeal for laptops to be donated, used ones by parents, doesn't that suggest, Madam President, that this tool is necessary for our children? Why is the opposition And I am a little disappointed in the new senator. I thought she was going to bring something fresh to this debate. She's going back to the argument of Kigai Kiasa. That to me is disappointing. After I heard her talk about her interest and sensitivity to special education and persons who were affected, I really appreciated that. She can relate to how learning is affected. That was excellent. But then she takes the cue from wherever and then tries to hit on laptops. Madam President, I was utterly disappointed. Utterly disappointed. So, Madam President, here we are today. Oh, by the way, before I close, you see, the opposition continues to make certain references. And while I understand we were trying to talk about school security and persons entering the compound without permission to cause mischief, I don't think it was the best way to describe them was to use the term riffraff or whatever it was. Riffraff? I will not, menaces. I will not refer to any young person in this country who has made a bad decision, who has unlawfully entered a school or done something like that, and these people obviously need help. I will not refer to them as riffraffs. No. We must stop doing that. We must stop it. And to come into this chamber on your debut as a new senator and refer to anybody as a riffraff in this chamber is unacceptable. I was tempted, Madam President, to stand, but she wasn't referring to us, so I wasn't even sure if that was parliamentary language. And not only to mention it and say, okay, it was just a slip of the tongue, to insist that we have to say those things. We are afraid, Madam President, these are the things that her leader did for 5 years that caused, I will not repeat them, that caused them to be where they are today. And I'm hoping that the opposition would have learned not to say those things. Not to say those things. Be careful how you call people. Even the troublesome young men and women who are deviant, who may, because a school's fence is compromised, enter a school, who may, because the security of the school is compromised, go get onto the compound to create mischief. That young person is someone's son or someone's daughter. Is a human being who may have, who knows what the situation is. Who knows whether they were not frustrated like her husband was in school because he had a learning difficulty. You're not listening, Madam President. It could be somebody who was frustrated like her husband was, had learning difficulty and couldn't cope and dropped out. And now is creating problems. That person we need to reach out and help, not refer to them by names. That is not the solution. Madam President, I hope the opposition is listening. And so, let me wrap up this discussion and see. We came to this Senate this morning to debate the borrowing of $6 million US dollars, approximately 16.2 million EC dollars, to respond to damages that was done to 16 of our schools and others, 16 prioritized, to respond to what was done because of weather system. But it seems that the opposition came here to debate something else. But I want to bring us back to that particular point and see that anytime this government and any government is going to have an intervention to help our children, to help our schools, our teachers, and our education system, I will stand on my 2 feet when I get an opportunity and I will support it. There are times it may need some trimming, there are times it may need some, improving, I agree, but I will support it. And I ask that this be considered as an intervention that is necessary. And I look forward to the schools that will get attention around this country. I look forward to the continuation of the rehabilitation of our school plants, the review of our instructional processes, and the safety of our schools so that our children can be educated in a safe, secure, comfortable, and productive school environment. I thank you, Madam President.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $6 million, the loan, from the African Export-Import Bank to finance the construction of social infrastructure and other facilities damaged or destroyed by Tropical Storm Brett under the Education Rehabilitation Climate-Linked Facility. Be it further resolved that A, the loan is repayable in 7 years, commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 2 years. B, the loan is repayable in equal semi-annual installments on the 30th day of June and the 31st day of December of each year after the grace period. C, interest is payable at a rate of 6% per annum. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the Senate stands suspended until 3:10 in the evening, 3:10 p.m.
Senators, the question is that the sitting of the Senate be suspended until 3:10 p.m. I now put the question. As many who have that opinion say aye. Aye. As many of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senate suspended.
All rise.
Because you were in English mode, you see. Welcome back to the National Television Network, NTN, where we witnessed this morning's proceedings of the Senate, where the substantive debate centered around a motion which was presented by the Honorable Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism, Investment, Creative Industries, Culture and Information, and Leader of Government Business, Honorable Gibeon Ferdinand. Now that motion centered on a loan which was discussed and passed in the lower house on Friday, where it authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow in the amount of $6 million for the refurbishment of schools that were damaged during the passage of Tropical Storm Brett. And in his presentation, just as the Minister of Finance had done on Tuesday, the Leader of Government Business mentioned that 16 schools are earmarked for the refurbishment of the schools. The debate was not as straightforward as the motion, itself, because it seemed a pretty straightforward motion, and there was a lot of points of arguments raised by the opposition senators. Chiefly, I just want to speak on the main thing, that the loan, even though the Senator Nancy Charles had said that they were in support of the motion for the refurbishment of schools, she did have some points, and her criticism mainly centered on the loan being payable in 7 years, and she felt that the interest rate was high. Michael?
Yes, merci Virgile. Nous venons au bout de la première session en Sénat là aujourd'hui. Ça c'est qui commence comme ça bon matin, approchant 20 minutes pour 11 heures. Mais la tenue des motions qui ont fait débat assez bien, comme nous avons discuté. C'est une motion qui a pour le gouvernement prêté. Ça c'est l'argent en valeur. Première c'était l'argent côté c'est pas pour prêter. Première motion c'était pour le gouvernement changer et bien ranger situation ça va créer value added tax de VAT particulièrement pour accommoder barrel ça c'est baril diwan Noël ça va calé pour combien de temps côté du gouvernement c'est pas seulement le gouvernement ça mais plusieurs gouvernements avant j'ai kabay une opportunité pour joindre baril l'autre pays famille et tout ce monde là et aussi pour joindre bagay qu'on toys pour maman en temps ça là à ces constituency à chaque c'est même parlement kabay c'est maman là toys pour jouer bagay pour jouer et c'est ça c'était première motion il y a chaque discussion à suivre et au deuxième c'était côté gouvernement qui a prêté $6 millions américains pour ça c'est pour ranger l'école qui était affectée par ça c'est mauvais temps Brett avec la tenue encore moi dit chaque discussion aussi ça qui est intéressant aujourd'hui avec maman ça dit c'est la tenue de enfin trois Sénat qui sermenté aujourd'hui puisqu'il n'y a pas là continuellement nous tenions un qui ça c'est sénateur Shelton Daniel à ce façade gouvernement il était qu'à replacer sénateur Pauline avec Pauline Antoine Prosper et aussi nous aussi tenu ça c'est sénateur Alison Jean qui parle là mais à ce façade opposition il y a deux façades ça c'est sénateur Nancy Charles qui là qui a représenté façade opposition il était déjà là avant mais un sénateur neuf c'est sénateur
Jean-Pierre
et c'est changé le premier nom c'est gars mais c'est sénateur la première fois il est venu là et qui a représenté le sénateur Harold Stanislas et aussi le sénateur Ferrapolius. Quand même, en tout, c'était en chaque débat au WhatsApp, mais it était intéressant par you there.
Yes. So the House is suspended until 3:10 p.m. this afternoon, where we'll see the continuation of motions and bills to be presented. So on behalf of the team, I'm virtually auntie. Do join us back here at 3:10 this afternoon for continuation of Senate proceedings. I'm virtually auntie with
Michael Gaspar. Merci. Nous avons dévié en studio nous MTN échanger vous saviez brancher puis nous à 10 minutes après 3 heures après-midi et nous allons bien continuer.